A biker gang picks the wrong day to mess with an outspoken liberal at a bustling subway station. What starts as a chaotic encounter quickly spirals into an unexpected journey of personal growth, self-discovery, and hard-earned life lessons for everyone involved. It was rush hour at the Grandview Subway Station, and the place was alive with its usual chaos. People of all sorts rushed past, professionals clutching briefcases, teens glued to their phones, families trying to keep kids in check. In the middle of it all stood Rory, a fiery idealist who had a knack for speaking their mind, regardless of the consequences. Dressed in a plaid shirt, worn sneakers, and an Earth for Everyone tote bag slung over one shoulder, Rory was the epitome of unshakable confidence. Enter Jackson, the leader of the infamous Iron Wolves biker gang. Jackson wasn't the kind of guy you'd miss in a crowd. With his leather jacket adorned with patches and his signature dark shades, he radiated an air of menace. Behind him trailed his crew, Travis, a wiry troublemaker with a perpetual smirk, and Diesel, a burly figure who looked like he could crush a vending machine with his bare hands. They were out of place in the subway station, and they knew it. Their loud laughter and taunts cut through the air like knives, creating a bubble of unease around them. Rory had been minding their own business, waiting for the train while reading an article on their phone about environmental advocacy. It was a topic they were deeply passionate about, and it often served as a distraction from the chaotic world around them. But the moment Jackson's crew began harassing a young man trying to navigate the turnstiles with a stroller, Rory's focus shifted entirely. The young man fumbled with the stroller as Diesel deliberately blocked his path, smirking. Travis chimed in with a mocking, "What's the rush, pal? Don't worry, the train won't leave without you." "Hey!" Rory's voice rang out clear and cutting. Heads turned. "Why don't you pick on someone your own size, or better yet, don't pick on anyone at all?" The bikers turned in unison, their amusement replaced by mild surprise. It wasn't every day someone had the guts to confront them. Jackson tilted his head, sizing Rory up like a predator assessing prey. "And who are you supposed to be? The subway police?" Jackson's voice dripped with mockery. Rory crossed their arms, undeterred. "Nope, just someone who doesn't tolerate bullies." A ripple of tension swept through the station. The commuters who had been trying to ignore the commotion now lingered, curious about how this would play out. Rory felt the weight of their gaze but refused to back down. Jackson stepped closer, his boots thudding against the tiled floor. The air grew heavy with unspoken challenge. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, his tone low and threatening. "But guts can only get you so far, kid." Rory took a step forward, closing the distance. "And what's the next step? You and your buddies going to prove how tough you are by intimidating someone else? Real impressive." Travis let out a bark of laughter. "This one's got a mouth." But Jackson wasn't laughing. His lips curled into a thin smile, but his eyes held a flicker of something else. Annoyance, maybe even respect. Rory's defiance wasn't what he'd expected, and he didn't like surprises. "You don't know who you're messing with," Jackson warned. "And you don't know who you're messing with," Rory shot back, their voice steady. "Now, why don't you let the guy through and move on with your lives? Or is this the most exciting thing you've got going on today?" A smattering of chuckles came from the crowd. Emboldened, Rory held Jackson's gaze, refusing to blink. For a moment, it seemed like the confrontation would escalate, until the sound of the incoming train broke the tension. The screech of metal on metal served as an unintentional referee, pulling everyone's attention. Jackson glanced at his crew, then back at Rory. "You're lucky we've got somewhere to be," he muttered, though it was clear he was backing down to save face. The bikers stepped aside, and the young man with the stroller hurried through the turnstile, murmuring a quick "thank you" to Rory as he passed. Rory didn't take their eyes off Jackson, even as the train screeched to a halt and the doors opened. Jackson held their gaze until the very last second, a silent promise that this wasn't over. As the bikers boarded the train, Rory finally let out the breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. The adrenaline coursing through their veins left them shaky, but they stood tall, shoulders squared. The crowd began to disperse, but a few people nodded in silent approval as they passed. A tap on Rory's shoulder startled them. It was an older woman, her face lined with years of wisdom. "That was brave of you," she said softly, "but be careful. Those kinds of men don't let things go so easily." Rory smiled faintly. "I've dealt with worse." The woman nodded, but her expression remained worried as she walked away. Rory turned back to the platform, feeling a strange mix of triumph and dread. They had no idea what they'd just gotten themselves into, but one thing was certain. This wasn't the last they'd see of Jackson and his crew. As the train pulled away, the faint roar of its departure left an eerie silence in its wake. Rory glanced at their reflection in the glass of the next train's approaching doors. The person staring back at them was confident, sure, but for how long? Behind them, the shadows of something more dangerous loomed, waiting to pounce. The moment the train doors closed behind Jackson and his crew, Rory felt a chill run down their spine. They wanted to believe that the bikers would simply move on, but something about Jackson's parting glare said otherwise. Rory adjusted the strap of their tote bag, muttering under their breath, "Well, that was fun." The platform began to empty as the next train approached. Rory considered hopping on, but their instincts told them to hang back. As the train whooshed past, Rory caught a glimpse of Jackson and his crew inside, talking animatedly. Rory's heart sank when Jackson gestured toward the doors just as the train slowed down at the next station. He wasn't leaving. He was doubling back. "Great," Rory muttered, tightening their grip on their bag. They didn't wait for the train to stop. Darting toward the nearest staircase, Rory navigated the maze of the subway system like someone who had been born in it. They skipped 2 steps at a time, weaving through crowds with practiced precision. Behind them, a shout echoed. It wasn't hard to guess who it was. Rory stole a glance over their shoulder and caught sight of Travis, the wiry member of the gang, sprinting down the staircase. His grin was wolfish, a hunter enjoying the chase. Rory's legs burned as they pushed harder, slipping through the turnstiles just as an attendant yelled, "Hey, you need to swipe." Rory didn't stop to explain. Travis, however, was less agile, fumbling with the turnstile as the attendant tried to block his path. Rory used the delay to their advantage, darting into a side corridor that connected to another set of platforms. They scanned the signs, their mind racing. Northbound? Eastbound? Anywhere but here sounded good. They heard Diesel's voice booming in the distance, barking orders to someone Rory couldn't see. "Split up! That little punk can't have gone far." Rory ducked into a shadowy alcove, their heart hammering against their ribs. They'd always been quick on their feet, but this was different. The stakes were higher. They crouched low, trying to steady their breathing. A janitor wheeled a mop bucket past them, giving Rory a puzzled look but saying nothing. The muffled roar of an approaching train snapped Rory out of their hiding spot. Timing was everything now. They waited until the train doors opened, then slipped through the crowd, using the chaos of disembarking passengers as cover. Rory moved toward the far end of the platform, where another staircase led up to the street level. The sound of heavy boots on the tile floor grew louder. Rory risked another glance behind them and cursed. Jackson was now leading the pursuit, his strides long and purposeful. Unlike his crew, he wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to clear the path. Rory's pulse quickened. They needed to lose him, and fast. Spotting a street musician setting up near the stairwell, Rory had an idea. They veered toward the musician, grabbing a fistful of crumpled bills from their pocket and stuffing them into the open guitar case. "Play something loud," Rory hissed. The musician blinked but obeyed, launching into an ear-splitting rendition of an old rock anthem. The sudden noise startled the crowd, creating a momentary bottleneck at the stairs. Rory used the distraction to slip into an adjacent service corridor, ducking under a partially raised gate. The smell of damp concrete and mildew was overwhelming, but Rory pressed on, their sneakers squeaking on the wet floor. They could hear the gang shouting somewhere above them, but the echoes made it hard to pinpoint their location. The corridor opened into a storage area filled with stacks of old subway signs and broken turnstiles. Rory weaved through the clutter, their breath coming in short gasps. They spotted an emergency exit door at the far end and made a beeline for it, only to stop short when they heard voices outside. "We've got this exit covered." Travis's voice carried through the thin metal door. Rory swore under their breath. Trapped. They doubled back, their eyes darting around for another way out. Their gaze landed on a rusted maintenance ladder bolted to the wall. It led to a hatch labeled "Authorized Personnel Only." "Good enough," Rory muttered, climbing the ladder as quickly as they could. The hatch was heavier than it looked, but they managed to push it open, emerging onto the tracks of a disused tunnel. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint hum of distant trains. Rory crouched low, scanning the area. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. They crept along the tracks, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. Just as they started to believe they'd finally lost the bikers, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "There you are." Jackson's voice was calm, almost amused. He stood on the platform above, the beam of his flashlight fixed on Rory like a predator locking onto its prey. "I've got to hand it to you, kid. You're slippery." Rory straightened, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "You're pretty persistent for someone who has somewhere to be." Jackson chuckled, the sound low and menacing. "I don't like loose ends." Before Rory could respond, the faint rumble of an approaching train echoed through the tunnel. Jackson's smile widened. "Better move fast." Rory didn't wait for him to elaborate. They bolted, their shoes slipping on the gravel as they ran alongside the tracks. The train's headlights appeared in the distance, casting long, flickering shadows. Rory veered toward a side alcove just as the train roared past, the wind whipping their hair into their face. When the train was gone, so was Rory. Jackson cursed under his breath, his flashlight sweeping the empty tracks. "We'll find you," he muttered. "Count on it." The sun was just beginning to set as Rory emerged from the subway system, their chest heaving from the chase. The cool evening air was a welcome relief after the stifling tunnels, but there was no time to savor it. Jackson and his crew wouldn't give up that easily, and Rory knew it. They kept to the shadows, slipping through the bustling streets like a phantom. Rory's plan was simple: get as far away as possible. But plans have a funny way of falling apart. Rory turned into a narrow alley, hoping to find a shortcut to the busier part of town. Instead, they found Travis. He was leaning casually against a wall, twirling a switchblade in his hand. His grin widened as Rory skidded to a halt. "Lost, are we?" Travis said, pushing off the wall. "You've got guts, I'll give you that, but now it's time to pay the piper." Before Rory could respond, Diesel appeared at the other end of the alley, effectively cutting off their escape. The burly biker cracked his knuckles, his expression one of smug anticipation. Rory's eyes darted between the two bikers, their mind racing. "So, what's the plan? You beat up a random stranger and call it a victory? Real noble." Travis laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "Noble? Who said anything about noble? This is about teaching you a lesson, kid. You don't mess with the Iron Wolves." Rory took a step back, their heart pounding. "How about you let me go, and we all walk away from this with a shred of dignity?" Travis opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, a commotion erupted at the far end of the alley. A middle-aged woman carrying a grocery bag stumbled into view, clearly startled by the scene. She froze, her wide eyes darting from Rory to the bikers. "Move along, lady," Diesel growled, but the woman didn't budge. Is everything okay here?" she asked hesitantly, her voice trembling. The interruption was all Rory needed. Seizing the moment, they bolted toward Diesel, aiming for the narrow gap between him and the wall. Diesel lunged to block them, but Rory was faster, slipping past him just as the woman let out a startled cry. "Get back here!" Travis roared, charging after Rory. The chase spilled out of the alley and into the crowded street, drawing the attention of bystanders. Rory weaved through the throng, their lungs burning with exertion. But their luck ran out when Travis, in his blind determination, shoved a pedestrian out of his way. The man stumbled, crashing into a fruit cart which toppled over with a deafening crash. Apples and oranges rolled across the pavement as the vendor shouted in alarm. Rory skidded to a halt, their stomach twisting. The pedestrian lay sprawled on the ground, clutching his leg and groaning in pain. The crowd erupted in chaos, with people shouting and pointing. Jackson arrived on the scene moments later, his expression darkening as he took in the chaos. "What the hell happened?" he demanded. Travis pointed at Rory. "They're the reason we're here." Rory stepped forward, their hands raised. "This is on you," they said, their voice firm. "Your guy pushed him." The injured man's groans grew louder, drawing the attention of a pair of nearby police officers. They pushed through the crowd, their sharp gazes scanning the scene. "What's going on here?" one of the officers barked. Jackson stiffened, his jaw clenching. "Just a misunderstanding," he said, his tone deceptively calm. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Doesn't look like a misunderstanding to me." He gestured to the injured man. "Who's responsible for this?" The crowd erupted in a cacophony of accusations, fingers pointing at Jackson's crew. Rory could feel the tension mounting, their own sense of justice screaming at them to do something. "This guy needs help," Rory said, stepping closer to the injured man. They knelt beside him, ignoring the wary looks from the officers. "Call an ambulance. His leg might be broken." The officer closest to Rory glanced at them, clearly evaluating the sincerity in their voice. After a beat, he nodded and pulled out his radio. "We need medical assistance at the corner of 5th and Main. Possible fracture." Meanwhile, the second officer turned to Jackson, his hand resting on his holstered taser. "What's your story? Why are you chasing this kid?" Jackson, to his credit, didn't flinch under the scrutiny. "We were just passing through. My guy didn't mean for things to get out of hand." Rory let out a derisive laugh. "Passing through? Really? That's the best you've got?" The officer's eyes flicked back to Rory, curious now. "You seem pretty worked up for someone who's just a bystander." Rory sighed. "Fine. Here's the deal. They've been chasing me since the subway because I called them out for harassing someone else. If anyone's at fault here, it's them." "That's a lie," Travis snapped, but his face betrayed his guilt. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, many of them siding with Rory. "This guy needs medical attention," Rory said again, their voice rising. "And I don't care what happens to me, but you need to deal with them." The officer with the radio nodded toward his partner. "Cuff them all. Let's sort this out back at the station." "What?" Diesel protested, but a sharp glare from Jackson silenced him. As Rory was led to the police car alongside Jackson and his crew, they couldn't help but feel a mixture of vindication and dread. They had spoken their truth, but at what cost? "You just can't help yourself, can you?" Jackson muttered as the car door slammed shut. Rory met his gaze unflinching. "Someone has to do the right thing." Jackson didn't reply, but his silence spoke volumes. Somewhere in the distance, the ambulance's sirens wailed, a haunting reminder of how quickly things had spiraled out of control. The police station buzzed with activity as Rory and the Iron Wolves were led through its fluorescent-lit halls. Rory's nerves were on edge, but they masked it with a stoic expression, determined not to show any weakness in front of Jackson and his crew. Beside them, Jackson maintained his air of calm authority, while Diesel and Travis exchanged nervous glances. "Let's get this over with," Jackson muttered as they were ushered into a holding room. The officers didn't waste time separating the group into two sides, Rory on one, the bikers on the other. A grizzled officer with salt and pepper hair and a badge reading Sergeant Morales stepped into the room, his sharp eyes scanning the group. "Looks like we've got ourselves a mess," Morales said, his tone even but firm. "Care to explain why you were chasing this kid through half the city?" Jackson leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Misunderstanding. We were just trying to talk, and things got out of hand." Rory scoffed, unable to hold back. "Talk? You've been chasing me like I stole something. Let's not sugarcoat it." Morales raised a hand, silencing them both. "Enough. Here's the deal. Witnesses are backing this kid's story about you harassing someone at the subway. Add to that the fruit vendor's busted cart and the injured bystander, and you're not looking good." Travis opened his mouth to protest, but Jackson shot him a warning glare that shut him up. Morales continued, his gaze shifting to Rory. "And you," he said, "while I appreciate you stepping in for that man at the subway, this whole situation spiraled because you couldn't walk away. Next time, let the police handle it." Rory straightened, their jaw tightening. "So, what happens now?" Morales sighed, rubbing his temples. "The bystander's pressing charges against the lot of you for reckless endangerment. But, lucky for you, he's also open to an alternative solution." The tension in the room thickened. Jackson's brows furrowed. "What kind of solution?" Morales smirked, pulling out a folder and tossing it onto the table. "Community service. You'll work off the damages and show the court you're not a lost cause. It's either that or a trip to county jail." Diesel let out a low growl. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Morales shot back. 30 days of community service, all of you, together." Rory blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, I have to work with them?" "That's the deal," Morales said, shrugging. "It's either that, or you go before the judge. Your call." Jackson leaned forward, his gaze narrowing at Morales. "You're really gonna make us work with this kid?" "Like I said, that's the deal," Morales replied, unfazed. "And if any of you step out of line, it's jail time. No exceptions." Rory hesitated, weighing their options. As much as they despised the idea of working alongside the bikers, the alternative wasn't appealing. Finally, they nodded. "Fine, I'll do it." Jackson exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. "Guess we don't have much of a choice, do we?" "Glad you're seeing reason," Morales said. "Now let's get the paperwork sorted." The next morning, Rory found themselves standing in front of a weathered community center on the edge of town. It was a far cry from the bustling streets they were used to, its peeling paint and overgrown lawn a testament to years of neglect. A large sign out front read, "Rebuild and Restore Initiative." "Perfect," Rory muttered, adjusting their tote bag. They turned to see Jackson and his crew pull up on their motorcycles, the roar of the engines cutting through the quiet morning. "You look thrilled," Jackson said as he approached, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Rory crossed their arms. "Let's just get this over with." The group was greeted by a wiry man in his 60s, his kind eyes crinkling behind thick glasses. He introduced himself as Mr. Langston, the program coordinator. "Welcome, everyone," Langston said, his voice warm but firm. "You'll be working together to clean up the neighborhood, starting with the graffiti on the old murals downtown. Supplies are in the back. Any questions?" Diesel raised a hand, his expression skeptical. "Yeah, what if we don't want to do this?" Langston's smile didn't waver. "Then I call the police and let them know you're not holding up your end of the deal. Any other questions?" Silence. "Good," Langston said, clapping his hands. "Let's get to it." The group's first task was a mural near the corner of Pine and Maple, its once vivid colors now buried under layers of graffiti. Rory set to work with a scraper and a bucket of solvent, while the bikers tackled the larger sections with pressure washers. It didn't take long for the bickering to start. "Watch where you're spraying, Diesel," Rory snapped, dodging a stream of water that narrowly missed their shoes. "Maybe don't stand in the way," Diesel shot back, smirking. "Enough," Jackson barked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Let's just get this done." Despite the friction, progress was made. By midday, the mural's original design began to emerge, a vibrant scene of children playing in a park, their laughter almost audible in the bright colors. Rory couldn't help but smile, a small sense of accomplishment breaking through their frustration. "It's actually starting to look like something again," they said. Jackson glanced at the mural, then at Rory. Guess you're not completely useless. High praise, Rory said dryly, but their tone lacked its usual bite. For the first time since the ordeal began, there was a flicker of something resembling camaraderie. It was fleeting, but it was a start. The second day of the community service project began under a blazing sun. Rory arrived early, eager to get started and avoid unnecessary interaction with Jackson and his crew. The previous day's tentative truce had done little to ease the tension, and Rory wasn't optimistic about how long it would hold. The day's assignment was ambitious, repainting the exterior of a rundown community center that had been tagged with graffiti. The building's once bright yellow walls were now a patchwork of crude drawings and faded slogans. Rory surveyed the task with a mix of determination and dread. "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us," they muttered. Jackson's arrival shattered the relative peace. The roar of motorcycles announced the Iron Wolves' presence long before they came into view. Rory didn't even bother turning around as the group dismounted and sauntered over. "Morning, sunshine," Jackson called out, his tone laced with sarcasm. Rory rolled their eyes. "Can we skip the banter and just get to work?" "Someone's in a mood," Travis quipped, earning a chuckle from Diesel. Mr. Langston appeared moments later, his cheerful demeanor unchanged despite the palpable tension. "Good morning, everyone. Today we'll be focusing on the exterior walls. Supplies are over there," he said, pointing to a stack of paint cans, brushes, and rollers. "Work together, and remember, this is about making the community a better place." The group dispersed reluctantly, each person grabbing supplies and staking out a section of the wall. Rory ended up near Travis, a situation they would have preferred to avoid. Travis, true to form, wasted no time stirring the pot. "You sure you can handle this, hero?" he asked, smirking as he dipped his roller into a tray of primer. "Pretty sure I can handle painting a wall," Rory shot back. Travis leaned closer, his voice low enough that only Rory could hear. "You know, Jackson's only putting up with this because he has to. Once this is over, we're not done with you." Rory's hand tightened around their brush, but they forced themselves to stay calm. "I'm not afraid of you, Travis, so save your threats." The rest of the morning passed in a tense silence, broken only by the occasional barked instruction from Mr. Langston. By noon, the group had made decent progress, though the heat and physical labor were taking their toll. Rory wiped sweat from their brow, stepping back to admire the freshly painted section of wall. "Not bad," they muttered, allowing themselves a brief moment of satisfaction. Diesel, working nearby, overheard. "Don't pat yourself on the back too hard. We've got a long way to go." "Thanks for the pep talk," Rory replied dryly. Despite the sniping, there were glimmers of productivity. Jackson, surprisingly, seemed genuinely invested in the work. Rory caught him stepping in to help Diesel fix a dripping roller, his instructions calm and efficient. For a brief moment, Jackson looked almost normal. Of course, the peace didn't last. The afternoon took a turn when Travis, clearly bored, decided to liven things up. He accidentally splattered paint onto Rory's arm, the bright yellow standing out starkly against their skin. "Oops," Travis said, feigning innocence. "My bad." Rory glared at him, their patience wearing thin. "Cut it out, Travis." "What's the matter? Can't take a joke." Before Rory could respond, Jackson's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Travis, enough." The command was sharp, and for once, Travis didn't argue. He muttered something under his breath and turned back to his section of the wall. Rory shot Jackson a surprised look, but he ignored it, focusing instead on his own work. The incident left a sour mood hanging over the group, but it also served as a turning point. Jackson's intervention, however reluctant, sent a message that even Travis couldn't ignore. The rest of the day passed without further incidents, though the tension lingered. As the afternoon wore on, Rory found themselves working beside Jackson on one of the larger wall sections. It was an awkward silence at first, but Jackson eventually broke it. "You always this stubborn?" he asked, not looking up from his roller. Depends on who you ask, Rory replied. Jackson chuckled, a low, unexpected sound. Fair enough. Rory glanced at him, unsure of what to make of the moment. Why do you care about any of this? The work, I mean. Jackson paused, his expression darkening for a moment before he shrugged. Better than sitting in a cell. It wasn't the answer Rory was expecting, but they let it go. There was something in Jackson's tone, something almost vulnerable that made them think there was more to the story, but pushing him wasn't worth the risk. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Mr. Langston called the group together to wrap up. He surveyed the progress with a satisfied smile. Great work today, everyone. The building's already starting to look better. Rory glanced at the freshly painted walls, their exhaustion tempered by a small sense of accomplishment. It wasn't much, but it was a step in the right direction. As the group packed up, Jackson approached Rory, his expression unreadable. You did good today, he said gruffly. Rory blinked, caught off guard. Thanks, I guess. Don't get used to it, Jackson added, his tone lightening just enough to soften the blow. Rory watched him walk away, their feelings a confusing mix of irritation and reluctant respect. Whatever else Jackson was, he wasn't entirely the person they had assumed, but that didn't mean he could be trusted. The day ended with Rory walking home alone, their thoughts a jumble of frustration and determination. The bikers were a thorn in their side, no doubt about it, but if this project had any chance of succeeding, they'd have to find a way to coexist. It was a daunting challenge, but Rory had never been one to back down. By the third day of the community service project, the group had fallen into an uneasy rhythm. Each morning began with grumbled greetings and reluctant cooperation, and each afternoon ended with everyone going their separate ways, exhausted but making noticeable progress. The graffiti that had once scarred the walls of the community center was nearly gone, replaced with bright, clean surfaces that begged for fresh paint. Rory arrived early as usual, their tote bag packed with snacks and a reusable water bottle. They found solace in these quiet moments before the bikers showed up, when they could focus on the work without distractions. But today, Jackson arrived earlier than expected, his motorcycle's low rumble breaking the morning calm. You're early, Rory said, glancing up from the supplies they were sorting. Jackson shrugged, leaning against his bike. Figured I'd beat Travis and Diesel here. Fewer headaches that way. Rory smirked faintly, surprised by the hint of honesty. Smart move. For a moment they worked in silence, the awkwardness palpable but not unbearable. Jackson grabbed a scraper and joined Rory at the wall, his movements precise and methodical. Rory stole a glance at him, wondering what had driven someone like him to lead a gang like the Iron Wolves. Why'd you join them? Rory asked suddenly, the question slipping out before they could stop themselves. Jackson froze, his hand hovering over a stubborn patch of graffiti. What's it to you? Rory hesitated, unsure if they'd crossed a line. I don't know. Just curious, I guess. Jackson sighed, his expression hardening. You wouldn't understand. Try me. For a long moment, it seemed like Jackson wouldn't answer. But then, to Rory's surprise, he began to speak. I didn't have much of a choice, he said, his voice low. Grew up in a town where you were either part of a crew or you were nobody. My old man bailed when I was a kid, and my mom worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. The wolves, they were a way out, or at least that's what I thought. Rory listened quietly, the usual sharpness in their demeanor replaced by genuine interest. But it wasn't what you expected. Jackson chuckled bitterly. Not even close. By the time I figured that out, I was already in too deep. Why didn't you leave? Jackson's jaw tightened, and for a moment Rory thought he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke again, his tone heavy with regret. Because I didn't think I could, and maybe I didn't want to. The wolves gave me a sense of power, a place to belong. But it came with a price. Rory frowned, sensing there was more to the story. What kind of price? Jackson hesitated, his gaze fixed on the wall in front of him. Let's just say I've done things I'm not proud of." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Rory didn't press further. They could see the pain in Jackson's eyes, the kind of pain that came from a lifetime of bad choices and buried guilt. For the first time, Rory felt a flicker of empathy for him, though they weren't ready to admit it out loud. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Travis and Diesel, their boisterous voices cutting through the stillness. Jackson's demeanor shifted instantly, his vulnerability replaced with his usual tough exterior. "Look who's getting a head start," Travis said, smirking as he approached. "Trying to impress someone, Jax?" "Shut up and grab a roller," Jackson snapped, his tone leaving no room for argument. The rest of the day passed in a blur of scraping, priming, and painting. Despite the morning's tense exchange, Rory couldn't help but steal glances at Jackson, their mind racing with questions. Who was he, really? And was there any hope for someone like him to break free from the life he'd chosen? By midday, the heat was oppressive, and tempers began to fray. Diesel muttered under his breath about the futility of the project, while Travis grew increasingly careless with his paint roller, splattering droplets onto everyone within range. "Watch it, Travis," Rory snapped, wiping a streak of white paint off their arm. "Relax," Travis replied, grinning. "It's just paint." "Travis," Jackson said, his voice low and warning. "Cut it out." Travis huffed but backed off, muttering something unintelligible. Rory glanced at Jackson, surprised by his intervention. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. A glimpse of the control Jackson exerted over his crew, and perhaps a sliver of decency buried beneath his rough exterior. As the afternoon wore on, Rory found themselves working alongside Diesel on a particularly stubborn section of wall. Despite his gruff demeanor, Diesel proved to be surprisingly efficient, his broad strokes covering the surface with precision. "You're pretty good at this," Rory said, attempting to break the silence. Diesel shrugged. "Used to help my uncle paint houses. Guess it stuck." Rory smiled faintly, filing the information away. The bikers were slowly revealing themselves, their hardened exteriors cracking under the weight of shared labor and forced proximity. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Mr. Langston called the group together to assign the next day's tasks. Rory barely heard him, their thoughts still tangled up in the morning's conversation. When the meeting ended, Rory lingered behind, watching as Jackson climbed onto his motorcycle. "You're full of surprises," Rory said as he started the engine. Jackson glanced at them, his expression unreadable. "Don't get used to it." With that, he roared off into the distance, leaving Rory to wonder if they'd just glimpsed a side of him that even he didn't fully understand. The morning air carried a crisp chill as Rory walked to the community center, their thoughts unusually heavy. The previous day's conversation with Jackson had stirred something they couldn't quite name, a mix of curiosity, empathy, and a reluctant realization that perhaps the Iron Wolves weren't as one-dimensional as they'd first believed. When Rory arrived, the group was already gathering. Travis was leaning against a stack of paint cans, twirling a brush like a baton. Diesel sat on a nearby bench, scrolling through his phone. Jackson stood apart from them, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on something distant. Rory approached cautiously, setting their tote bag down near the supplies. "Morning," they said, their voice neutral. "Morning," Jackson replied without looking at them. Travis, however, was quick to chime in. "Hey, hero, ready to save the day again?" Rory sighed, already regretting their decision to engage. "Let's just get to work." Before any further banter could ensue, Mr. Langston appeared, clipboard in hand. "Good to see everyone here on time," he said with a smile. "Today's task is a bit different. We'll be cleaning up the park next door. Trash collection, landscaping, that sort of thing. Should be a nice change of pace." The group groaned collectively, but no one protested. Rory grabbed a pair of gloves and a trash bag, eager to avoid further interaction with Travis. They made their way to the far side of the park where the litter was most concentrated. As Rory worked, they found themselves reflecting on their own past. Growing up, they'd always been the one to stand up for what was right. even when it made them a target. Their parents had often called it stubbornness, but Rory saw it as a refusal to accept injustice. That mindset had cost them friendships, opportunities, and more than a few sleepless nights. "Hey!" a voice interrupted their thoughts. Rory turned to see Jackson approaching, a rake slung over his shoulder. "What do you want?" Rory asked, not unkindly. Jackson shrugged. "Just figured I'd see how you're holding up. You've been quiet today." Rory hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Yesterday got me thinking about choices, consequences." "Ah," Jackson said, nodding as he set the rake aside. "The good old what-if spiral." Rory smiled faintly. "Yeah, something like that." Jackson sat on a nearby bench, his expression thoughtful. "You don't strike me as the type to have regrets." "Oh, I have plenty," Rory admitted, "but I try not to dwell on them. Doesn't mean they don't creep in, though." Jackson leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What kind of regrets?" Rory hesitated, then sighed. Standing up for people isn't always as noble as it sounds. Sometimes it backfires. People get hurt or they don't want your help in the first place. But I can't seem to stop. It's like, if I don't say something, who will? Jackson nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I get that. Feeling like it's on you to make things right." Rory studied him for a moment, then decided to share something they rarely talked about. "When I was in high school, there was this kid, Leo. He was always getting picked on. One day, I stepped in, told the bullies to back off. It worked for a while, but then they started targeting me instead." Jackson looked up, his expression unreadable. "What happened?" Rory shrugged, their voice tinged with bitterness. "It escalated. They trashed my locker, spread rumors, made my life hell. And Leo, he never said a word. Didn't even thank me. I don't blame him, though. He was scared. I get that now." Jackson leaned back, exhaling sharply. "That's rough." "It was," Rory admitted. "But it taught me something. Doing the right thing doesn't mean you'll be rewarded. Sometimes it just means you sleep a little easier at night." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distant sounds of the park filled the silence. Children laughing, birds chirping, the rustle of leaves in the wind. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Jackson said finally. "But guts can get you in trouble." Rory smirked. "Tell me something I don't know." Jackson chuckled, the sound low and unexpected. "Fair enough." The moment was interrupted by Travis's voice calling from across the park. "Hey, lovebirds, we're supposed to be working, remember?" Rory rolled their eyes, but the tension of the moment had already passed. Jackson stood, grabbing his rake and slinging it over his shoulder. "Guess we'd better get back to it." "Yeah," Rory said, watching him walk away. For the first time, they felt like they'd seen the man behind the persona. A glimpse of someone who had made mistakes but wasn't beyond redemption. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the freshly painted walls of the community center, a stark contrast to the chipped and graffiti-covered facade it had been just a few days ago. Rory arrived early as always, eager to finish the final touches on the mural they'd worked so hard to restore. Today was going to be different. Less tension, more progress. At least that's what Rory hoped. The group trickled in, one by one. Diesel arrived first, his usual scowl softened by the bright morning light. Travis followed shortly after, his trademark smirk firmly in place. Jackson brought up the rear, his helmet tucked under his arm, his expression unreadable. "Morning," Rory greeted, trying to sound upbeat. "Morning," Jackson replied, nodding curtly. Travis, predictably, couldn't resist. "You're awfully chipper today. What's the occasion? Did you win the lottery?" "No," Rory replied evenly. "But if you actually helped today, I might consider it a miracle." Diesel let out a low chuckle, and even Jackson cracked a faint smile. It was a small moment, but it set the tone for the day. The task for the day was straightforward, finishing the mural. Mr. Langston had assigned everyone specific sections to work on, and for the first time the group seemed to fall into a natural rhythm. Rory found themselves working alongside Diesel again, whose steady hand with the paintbrush was unexpectedly precise. "You've got a knack for this," Rory remarked, gesturing to Diesel's work. "Don't let it go to your head," Diesel muttered, though his tone lacked its usual bite. Nearby, Travis was less focused, occasionally flicking paint at the ground to amuse himself. Rory shot him a warning glare, and Jackson intervened before things could escalate. "Travis, quit messing around," Jackson said firmly. "We're almost done here. Don't screw it up." Travis sighed but obeyed, his movements becoming more deliberate. Rory couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the group dynamics. Jackson's authority was unspoken but undeniable, and even Travis seemed to respect it. By midday, the mural was nearly complete. The vibrant colors of the restored design told a story of unity and community, a stark contrast to the gang-related graffiti that had once covered the wall. Rory stepped back to admire their work, a rare smile tugging at their lips. "It's beautiful," they said softly. Diesel nodded in agreement. "Not bad." Jackson approached, his gaze sweeping over the mural. "You did good, kid," he said, his tone uncharacteristically sincere. "We all did," Rory corrected, glancing at the others. For the first time, it felt like they were on the same team. The afternoon brought a moment of levity that none of them expected. Travis, bored and restless, decided to play a prank on Jackson. While Jackson was distracted, Travis switched the paintbrush he was holding with one dipped in bright pink paint. When Jackson returned to his section, he didn't notice at first, but as he stepped back to admire his work, the vibrant pink stood out like a sore thumb against the mural's muted tones. "What the hell?" Jackson growled, glaring at Travis. Travis burst into laughter, doubling over as he struggled to catch his breath. "You should have seen your face." Even Rory couldn't suppress a laugh, though they quickly tried to cover it with a cough. Diesel chuckled too, shaking his head in disbelief. Jackson's scowl deepened, but after a moment he let out a reluctant laugh. "You're an idiot, Travis." "Maybe," Travis said, grinning, "but I'm a hilarious idiot." The shared laughter broke the tension that had hung over the group for days. For a brief moment, they weren't a collection of reluctant participants in a court-mandated project. They were just people, working together and finding humor in the chaos. By the end of the day, the mural was finished. Mr. Langston gathered the group to admire their work, his expression one of pride and satisfaction. "You've all done an incredible job," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "This mural isn't just about restoring a wall, it's about bringing people together. And you've done that." The group exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of pride and disbelief. Even Travis looked humbled, though he quickly masked it with a cocky grin. As they packed up their supplies, Rory felt a strange sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just the mural. It was the fact that, against all odds, they were starting to come together as a team. Jackson approached as Rory slung their tote bag over their shoulder. "Not bad, huh?" he said, gesturing to the mural. "Not bad at all," Rory agreed. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, the weight of their shared experiences settling between them. Rory glanced at Jackson, wondering if he felt it too, the sense that maybe, just maybe, this project was changing them. That evening, as Rory walked home, they reflected on the day's events. The laughter they had shared, the progress they had made, it all felt significant, like a step in the right direction. For the first time in a long while, Rory allowed themselves to believe that change was possible. They paused at the corner near their apartment, glancing back at the direction they'd come from. The mural, though miles away, felt close to their heart. It wasn't just paint on a wall. It was a symbol of what could happen when people worked together, even under the unlikeliest of circumstances. "Small victories," Rory murmured to themselves, smiling as they turned and headed inside. "That's how it starts." The days of quiet progress didn't last long. By the time Rory arrived at the community center the following morning, an uneasy tension hung in the air. The mural had been a victory, a symbol of what they could accomplish together. But something had shifted overnight. The laughter and camaraderie of the previous day felt like a distant memory. Jackson was already there, leaning against his motorcycle with a cigarette dangling from his lips. His expression was dark, his usual calm replaced with a rigid intensity that Rory couldn't ignore. "Something wrong?" Rory asked as they approached. Jackson exhaled a stream of smoke, his gaze fixed on the ground. "You could say that." Before Rory could press for more information, the rumble of motorcycles echoed through the street. A group of unfamiliar bikers roared into view, their leather jackets emblazoned with a snarling wolf's head, similar to Jackson's crew, but different enough to signal a rival gang. The lead biker, a wiry man with a sharp jawline and piercing eyes, pulled up directly in front of Jackson. He killed the engine and climbed off his bike, his movements slow and deliberate. "Well, well," the man drawled, his voice slick with mockery. "Jackson, playing community hero now? Didn't think I'd live to see the day." Rory watched as Jackson straightened, his posture tense but composed. "What do you want, Rafe?" Rafe grinned, his teeth flashing like a predator toying with its prey. "Just passing through. Thought I'd see how the mighty Iron Wolves were holding up, now that you're busy scrubbing walls and playing nice." The tension between the two men was palpable, and Rory found themselves instinctively stepping closer to Jackson, their own nerves on edge. "This isn't your turf," Jackson said evenly, "so why don't you keep riding?" Rafe's grin widened, but his eyes remained cold. "I don't know. Seems like your little project here could use some artistic flair." He gestured to the mural, his tone dripping with derision. "Touch it, and you'll regret it," Jackson said, his voice low and lethal. Rafe chuckled, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, Jax. I'm just here to talk. Maybe remind you of where you came from. Don't forget, you don't get to play the good guy without consequences." Jackson didn't respond, his jaw clenching as Rafe mounted his bike again. The rival gang revved their engines, the sound reverberating through the street like a warning. Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, they were gone. "What the hell was that about?" Rory demanded as soon as the noise faded. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, the cigarette still smoldering between his fingers. "Old business. Nothing for you to worry about." Rory wasn't convinced. "Doesn't look like nothing. Who are they?" Jackson hesitated, clearly reluctant to share. "Rafe and his crew used to run with us back when the Iron Wolves were different. He's been trying to stir up trouble ever since he split off to form his own gang." "Why now?" Rory pressed. "Why come here?" Jackson exhaled sharply, crushing the cigarette under his boot. "Because he knows I'm trying to change things. And he doesn't like it." The weight of Jackson's words settled over Rory, and for the first time they saw just how much he was risking by being here. It wasn't just about cleaning walls or fulfilling a court order. It was about reclaiming something he'd lost, something Rafe wanted to take away. The rest of the day was marked by an uneasy silence. The group worked on clearing debris from a nearby lot, their usual banter replaced with strained glances and tense shoulders. Even Travis seemed subdued, his usual antics kept in check by the lingering threat of Rafe's gang. Rory found themselves watching Jackson closely, noting the subtle shifts in his demeanor. He was still giving orders, still keeping everyone on task, but there was a heaviness to him now, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. As the afternoon wore on, Rory decided they couldn't stay silent any longer. During a water break, they approached Jackson, who was leaning against a tree, his gaze distant. "Hey," Rory said, handing him a bottle. "You okay?" Jackson accepted the bottle with a nod, though he didn't drink. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," Rory said, their tone firm but not unkind. "You're carrying this whole thing on your shoulders and it's eating at you. Let someone help." Jackson's lips twitched in what might have been a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. And who's going to help me, Rory? You. Rory met his gaze unflinching. Yeah, if you let me. For a moment, Jackson didn't respond, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, his shoulders slumping. You don't get it. Guys like me, we don't get second chances. Not really. Maybe not, Rory said. But you're here, aren't you? You're trying. That's more than most people can say. Jackson studied them for a long moment, his guard slipping just enough for Rory to see the cracks beneath. Thanks, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. By the time the group wrapped up for the day, the tension had eased slightly, though the specter of Rafe's gang still loomed in the back of everyone's minds. As they packed up their tools, Rory caught Jackson's eye. We'll figure it out, they said, their voice steady. Whatever happens, we'll deal with it. Jackson didn't reply, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As Rory walked home that evening, they couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. The mural might have been a small victory, but the battle was far from over. The fallout from Rafe's appearance the day before lingered like a storm cloud over the group. Rory could feel it the moment they arrived at the community center. Jackson was quieter than usual, his movements sharp and efficient as he unloaded supplies. Travis and Diesel, normally prone to teasing and banter, kept their voices low, their eyes darting toward the street as if expecting trouble. Rory approached cautiously, trying to gauge the mood. "Morning," they said, their tone tentative. "Morning," Jackson replied curtly, not looking up from the box of tools he was sorting. Travis, however, couldn't resist a jab. "Look who's ready to save the day again." "Not today, Travis," Jackson snapped, his voice sharper than usual. Travis raised his hands in mock surrender, but wisely said nothing more. Mr. Langston arrived shortly after, oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. "Good morning, everyone," he called out cheerfully. "We've got a big task ahead of us today, clearing out the abandoned lot on Elm Street. The city's planning to turn it into a playground, but first, we need to make it safe." The announcement was met with a mix of groans and reluctant nods. Rory glanced at Jackson, who was already loading tools into the back of a truck. "You okay?" they asked quietly. "I'm fine," Jackson muttered, though his rigid posture suggested otherwise. The lot on Elm Street was a mess. Overgrown weeds and scattered debris covered the ground, and the remnants of old rusted playground equipment stood like forgotten skeletons. The group divided into pairs, with Rory and Jackson tackling one side while Travis and Diesel worked on the other. For the first hour, they worked in relative silence. Rory focused on pulling weeds and clearing trash, occasionally sneaking glances at Jackson. He moved with a single-minded intensity, his jaw clenched and his eyes scanning the area as if expecting an ambush. "You're really on edge today," Rory said finally, unable to hold back any longer. Jackson didn't respond at first, his hands tightening around the handle of the rake he was using. "Rafe's not gonna let this go," he said eventually, his voice low. "He'll be back." Rory frowned, their hands stilling as they considered his words. Why does he care so much? It's just a community service project. "It's not about the project," Jackson said, shaking his head. "It's about control. Rafe wants to remind me, and everyone else, that he's still in charge." "Is he?" Rory asked, their voice challenging. Jackson looked at them sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Not if I can help it." Before Rory could respond, the sound of approaching motorcycles shattered the relative quiet. They turned to see Rafe and his gang pulling up at the edge of the lot, their engines growling like a pack of wolves. "Great," Rory muttered. "Here we go." Rafe dismounted his bike, his grin as sharp and predatory as ever. "Thought I'd pay you a visit," he said, his tone light but laced with malice. "See how the cleanup crew's holding up." Jackson stepped forward, placing himself between Rafe and the rest of the group. "We're not looking for trouble, Rafe." "Who said anything about trouble?" Rafe replied, feigning innocence. "I'm just here to chat." "Then chat and leave," Jackson said firmly. Rafe's grin widened as he took a slow step forward. You're different, Jax. Softer. I remember when you wouldn't have hesitated to throw the first punch. Now look at you, playing nice, cleaning up garbage like a good little citizen. Jackson's fists clenched, but he didn't rise to the bait. Times change. People don't, Rafe countered. He turned his attention to Rory, his gaze sharp and assessing. And who's this? Your new sidekick? Rory met his gaze without flinching. I'm the person who's not afraid to call you out for being a bully. Rafe's eyes flashed with amusement, though there was an edge to it. Feisty. I like that. Leave them out of this, Jackson said, his voice low and dangerous. This is between you and me. Oh, I know, Rafe said, his grin fading. And don't worry, I'm not here to fight. Not today, anyway. Just wanted to remind you who you're dealing with. With that, he turned and motioned for his crew to follow. They revved their engines and peeled out, the sound echoing through the lot long after they were gone. The rest of the day was marked by a heavy silence. Even Travis, who usually couldn't keep his mouth shut, seemed unusually subdued. Rory found themselves stealing glances at Jackson, who worked with a quiet intensity that bordered on brooding. As they loaded the last of the debris into the truck, Rory decided to break the silence. You handled that well, they said, their voice careful. Jackson glanced at them, his expression unreadable. Did I? Because it feels like I'm just delaying the inevitable. Maybe, Rory admitted, but you didn't let him win. That counts for something. Jackson didn't respond, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Rory hope. As they drove back to the community center, the group remained quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Rory stared out the window, their mind racing with questions they weren't sure how to answer. Rafe's visit had been a reminder of the challenges they still faced, but it had also revealed something else, a glimpse of the strength Jackson carried, even in the face of his past. They didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. The rivalry between Jackson and Rafe was far from over, and when the next confrontation came, Rory was determined to be ready. The tension of Rafe's visit lingered into the next day, casting a shadow over the group's work. However, the community center's staff had scheduled a new project that left little time for brooding, assembling a series of benches and planters to place around the neighborhood park. While it seemed simple enough, the project required coordination, something the group was still learning. Rory arrived to find Diesel and Travis arguing over the best way to transport the heavy wooden slats from the storage shed to the assembly area. Travis, ever the joker, suggested carrying as many as possible in one trip, while Diesel insisted on multiple smaller loads. You'll break your back if you try that, Diesel grunted as he lifted a manageable stack. And you'll waste time making 10 trips, Travis shot back, hoisting a precarious pile that wobbled dangerously. Rory shook their head and stepped between them. Why don't we compromise? 2 or 3 trips, but with enough that you're not risking a hernia or dropping everything. Diesel raised an eyebrow but nodded. Fine. You're the expert now? Let's just get it done, Rory replied, already moving to help. Jackson arrived a few minutes later, his expression tired but less tense than the day before. Rory noticed him quietly watching the group as they worked, his gaze lingering on Travis and Diesel as they bickered, but ultimately followed Rory's instructions. You're letting them argue a lot less today, Rory commented as Jackson joined them. They listen better to you, Jackson replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. Maybe I should let you handle them. Rory smiled faintly. I think they're starting to get the hang of this. Don't let them fool you, Jackson said. They're stubborn as hell. Guess I'll have to be more stubborn then, Rory said with a shrug. Jackson chuckled, a rare sound that lightened the atmosphere. Good luck with that. As the morning turned into afternoon, the group settled into a rhythm. Rory found themselves working alongside Diesel again, who had become surprisingly cooperative. He even offered a tip on how to use a power drill more efficiently. Here, Diesel said, demonstrating the technique. Push steady, not too hard. Otherwise, you'll strip the screw. Rory watched carefully and mimicked his movements. Like this? Better, Diesel said with a nod. See? Not bad for a newbie. Thanks, Rory replied, genuinely appreciative. You've got some skills, you know? Yeah, well, Diesel muttered, his gruff demeanor returning. Doesn't mean I like doing this. Fair enough, Rory said, suppressing a smile. Nearby, Travis was attempting to align the backrest of a bench with limited success. Jackson eventually stepped in, wordlessly adjusting the placement and holding it steady while Travis secured it with bolts. Thanks, Travis muttered, clearly unused to accepting help. Don't get used to it, Jackson replied, though his tone was more teasing than harsh. The dynamic between them had shifted subtly, Rory realized. It wasn't exactly harmonious, but there was a sense of mutual respect that hadn't been there before. They were still rough around the edges, but they were starting to function as a team. The breakthrough came during a break when the group gathered around a cooler of water bottles and sandwiches provided by Mr. Langston. Travis, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. So, anyone else think we're actually doing a decent job? He said, smirking as he unwrapped his sandwich. Diesel snorted. Don't let it go to your head. Hey, I'm just saying, Travis replied, leaning back against the bench they'd just assembled. This isn't as bad as I thought it'd be. Rory raised an eyebrow. That's high praise coming from you. Don't get used to it, Travis said with a grin. But seriously, it's kind of cool seeing stuff come together. Like that mural, we did that. Jackson nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Yeah, we did. The group fell into a companionable silence, the weight of the admission settling over them. For the first time, it felt like they were all on the same page, united by a shared sense of accomplishment. The rest of the afternoon flew by. The group completed the benches and planters, placing them strategically around the park. Rory found themselves smiling as they stepped back to admire their work. The once empty space now felt inviting, a place where families could gather and children could play. Not bad, Jackson said, standing beside them. You should be proud. We all should, Rory replied, glancing at the others. Travis and Diesel were joking about something near the truck, their laughter echoing through the park. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. As they packed up for the day, Mr. Langston approached, his face lit with pride. You've done an incredible job, he said. This park is going to mean so much to the community. Glad we could help, Jackson replied, his voice quiet but sincere. Rory nodded, their heart swelling with a sense of purpose they hadn't felt in a long time. The project wasn't just about fulfilling a court order anymore. It was about making a difference, however small. That evening, as Rory walked home, they reflected on the day. The laughter, the teamwork, the shared sense of accomplishment. It all felt like a step in the right direction. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time it felt like they were moving forward together. Small victories, Rory thought, smiling to themselves, one step at a time. The steady rhythm of progress over the past few days had brought a tentative sense of calm to the group. The benches and planters in the park were already drawing compliments from passers-by, and the community center staff had started mentioning how much their work was improving the neighborhood. Rory couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride whenever someone stopped to say thank you. That morning, the group arrived at the community center to find Mr. Langston waiting for them with a new assignment. Beside him stood a middle-aged woman in a worn apron, her face lined with worry. She introduced herself as Mrs. Flores, the owner of a small family-run bakery a few blocks away. The city's inspecting my shop in a week, she explained, wringing her hands. It's been tough keeping up with repairs, and if they don't pass me, I'm not sure how much longer I can stay open. Mr. Langston stepped in. I thought this would be a great opportunity for you all to help someone in the community. Mrs. Flores has a list of what needs fixing: painting, patching up the ceiling, and repairing a broken display case. Think you can handle it? Jackson glanced at the group, then nodded. We've done worse. "Thank you," Mrs. Flores said, her voice trembling with relief. "You have no idea how much this means to me." When they arrived at the bakery, it was clear why Mrs. Flores was worried. The exterior paint was peeling, the awning was torn, and the interior ceiling had water stains from a long-leaking pipe. The display case she'd mentioned sat off to the side, its glass cracked and its frame barely holding together. "This is going to take some work," Diesel muttered, surveying the damage. "Good thing we're getting better at this," Rory said, rolling up their sleeves. The group divided up tasks. Rory and Travis tackled the painting, Jackson worked on repairing the awning, and Diesel focused on the display case. Mrs. Flores hovered nearby, offering drinks and snacks while expressing her gratitude every few minutes. As Rory painted the trim around the windows, Travis grumbled beside them. "How come we always get stuck with the boring stuff?" "Because you're good at it," Rory replied, smirking. "Flattery won't get you anywhere," Travis shot back, though his tone was more amused than annoyed. "Then maybe you'll just have to live with being the best window painter in town," Rory teased. Travis laughed, shaking his head. "You're something else, you know that." Rory smiled but didn't respond, focusing on the brush strokes. For all his bluster, Travis was starting to grow on them. Meanwhile, Jackson worked steadily on the awning, his movements efficient and precise. Mrs. Flores watched from the sidewalk, her expression a mix of awe and gratitude. "You're very good at this," she said, handing him a glass of lemonade. Jackson paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Had to learn a lot of things the hard way." "Well, I'm glad you did," she replied. "This shop has been in my family for generations. Losing it would break my heart." Jackson nodded, his expression softening. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen." Nearby, Diesel had nearly finished fixing the display case. He replaced the broken glass and tightened the frame, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate work. When he stepped back to admire his handiwork, he allowed himself a small smile. "Good as new," he said, catching Rory's eye. Rory gave him a thumbs up, and he nodded in acknowledgement. By midday, the bakery was already starting to look better. The fresh paint brightened the exterior, the repaired awning no longer sagged, and the display case gleamed like it had just been installed. Mrs. Flores brought out a tray of pastries for the group, her gratitude evident in every word. "I wish I could do more to thank you," she said as they sat on the curb eating together. "You're giving me hope when I thought I was out of options." "It's the least we can do," Rory replied. "This neighborhood deserves places like your bakery." Jackson, who rarely spoke during these moments, added quietly, "You've got a good thing here. Don't let anyone take it from you." Mrs. Flores' eyes glistened with tears as she nodded. "Thank you. All of you." As the afternoon wore on, the group focused on the finishing touches. Travis took it upon himself to repaint the bakery's sign, carefully tracing the letters to make them stand out. Rory helped Mrs. Flores reorganize the shelves inside, their conversation punctuated by laughter as they arranged loaves of bread and trays of cookies. By the time they were done, the bakery looked transformed. The peeling paint and sagging awning were gone, replaced by bright colors and sturdy repairs. Even the display case seemed to sparkle under the warm afternoon light. Mrs. Flores stood in the doorway, her hands pressed to her heart. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Jackson replied, his voice steady. "Just keep this place going." As the group gathered their tools and prepared to leave, Rory took one last look at the bakery. It wasn't just a building, it was a piece of the community, a place where people came together, and they had helped preserve it. That evening, as Rory walked home, they reflected on the day. The work they were doing was hard, but it was starting to feel meaningful in a way they hadn't expected. They were building more than benches and murals. They were building connections, with the community and with each other. Small victories, Rory thought again, their heart lighter than it had been in a long time. One step at a time. The morning came quietly, with the crisp scent of dew in the air. Rory walked to the community center, their thoughts heavy but not unpleasant. After the past few weeks of hard work, something in the neighborhood had shifted. The murals, the park benches, and Mrs. Flores's newly repaired bakery all seemed to carry a kind of energy, a reminder that small acts of care could ripple outward. When Rory arrived, Jackson was already there, leaning against the edge of the supply truck. He had a coffee in hand, and his posture was unusually relaxed. Rory raised an eyebrow as they approached. "Morning," they said. "Morning," Jackson replied, tipping his coffee cup in greeting. "You seem different today," Rory said, setting their bag down. "Dare I say, almost cheerful?" Jackson chuckled, a sound that had become less rare but still unexpected. "Don't get used to it." The others arrived shortly after, Diesel with his usual gruff nod and Travis who greeted the group with a dramatic stretch and a loud yawn. Mr. Langston was the last to arrive, clipboard in hand and an excited look on his face. "Good news," he announced. "The work you've done so far has gotten a lot of attention. The mayor's office even called to commend us for revitalizing the neighborhood. They want to see more, so today we're expanding our efforts to a new block." The group groaned in unison, but there was no real resistance. Rory exchanged a glance with Jackson, who shrugged. "Guess we're not done yet." The new block wasn't in terrible shape, but it had seen better days. Cracked sidewalks, faded storefronts, and scattered litter gave the area a tired, forgotten look. Mr. Langston assigned the group to clean and repaint a long wall that ran along the side of an old laundromat. The plan was to create another mural, this one inspired by the history of the neighborhood. As they worked, Rory found themselves paired with Jackson again, their brushes moving in unison as they applied the first layer of primer. The steady rhythm of painting created a comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional comment from Travis or the sound of Diesel's power tools in the background. "You've been quiet today," Rory said eventually, glancing at Jackson. "Just thinking," Jackson replied, his tone thoughtful. "About what?" Jackson hesitated, then sighed. "About how different things are now. A few months ago, I wouldn't have cared about any of this. Probably would have laughed at the idea of cleaning up a neighborhood." "But now," Rory prompted. Jackson met their gaze briefly before looking back at the wall. "Now it feels like maybe I've got something to prove. To myself, I mean. Like, maybe it's not too late to be better." Rory smiled faintly. "It's not. You're already proving that." Jackson didn't respond, but Rory could see the gratitude in his expression. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, a quiet acknowledgement of the progress they'd both made. By midday, the group had fallen into an easy rhythm. Diesel worked on repairing a rusted bench nearby, while Travis added flourishes to the mural design, his usual bravado replaced with surprising focus. Even Mr. Langston got his hands dirty, helping to clear weeds from the sidewalk. As they took a break for lunch, the group gathered on the curb, eating sandwiches and drinking water from paper cups. The conversation was light, but there was an underlying sense of camaraderie that hadn't been there at the start of the project. "You know," Travis said, leaning back against the wall, "I never thought I'd say this, but this whole thing isn't so bad." Diesel snorted. "Don't get all sentimental on us, Travis." "I'm serious," Travis insisted. "I mean, look around. This place actually looks better. And we did that." Jackson nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping over the block. "Yeah, we did." Rory glanced at him, noticing the subtle shift in his demeanor. He looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. It was a stark contrast to the man they'd first met, the one who'd seemed perpetually angry at the world. The afternoon passed quickly, the group's collective effort transforming the block piece by piece. The mural began to take shape, its vibrant colors bringing life to the once drab wall. By the time they wrapped up for the day, it was clear they were creating something special. As they packed up their supplies, Rory found themselves lingering near Jackson. "You really care about this, don't you?" they asked. Jackson shrugged, but there was no denying the truth in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess I do." Rory smiled. "That's good. This place needs people who care." Jackson nodded, his expression softening. "So do people." The words hung in the air, unspoken but understood. For all their differences, the group had become something more than a collection of strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were starting to feel like a team, maybe even a family. That evening, as Rory walked home, they couldn't stop thinking about the day's events. The work had been hard, but it had also been deeply rewarding. They thought about Jackson's quiet determination, Diesel's unexpected talent, and Travis's surprising focus. They thought about the mural, the bakery, and all the small victories they'd achieved together. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it felt like they were building something real, something that mattered. One step at a time, Rory thought, smiling to themselves. One step at a time. The day started with a heavy sky, clouds looming overhead as if reflecting the tension in the air. Rory noticed it the moment they arrived at the community center. Jackson was pacing near the supply truck, his usual calm replaced by a restless energy that set Rory on edge. "What's going on?" Rory asked. Jackson stopped pacing but didn't meet their eyes. "Rafe's crew is stirring things up again. Word is they've been hanging around, asking questions." "Questions about what?" Rory frowned. "About us," Jackson said, his tone clipped. "About what we're doing here." Before Rory could respond, Travis and Diesel arrived, their loud banter cutting through the tension. Even they seemed to notice the shift, their jokes faltering as they caught sight of Jackson's expression. "What's wrong?" Diesel asked. "Rafe," Jackson said simply. It was all the explanation they needed. Mr. Langston arrived shortly after, his cheerful demeanor undeterred by the dark clouds overhead. "Good morning," he called out, oblivious to the tension. "We've got another mural to work on today, plus some landscaping at the park. Let's make it count." The group exchanged uneasy glances but didn't argue. They gathered their supplies and set out for the day, the weight of Jackson's words hanging over them. The work started smoothly enough. The mural, another vibrant depiction of the neighborhood's history, began to take shape under their combined efforts. Rory focused on painting, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in their stomach. Jackson worked nearby, his movements methodical but lacking his usual focus. "Hey," Rory said quietly, stepping closer. "You okay?" Jackson hesitated. "Just keeping an eye out." "For Rafe?" "For trouble," Jackson corrected. "If he shows up, it won't just be to talk." Rory nodded, their grip tightening on the paintbrush. They weren't sure what to say, so they didn't say anything, letting the steady rhythm of work fill the silence. The storm broke in the early afternoon, but it wasn't the one brewing in the sky. The group was halfway through their work when the sound of motorcycles shattered the quiet. Rory's heart sank as Rafe's gang appeared at the edge of the park, their engines roaring like thunder. "Here we go," Jackson muttered, stepping forward to meet them. Rafe dismounted his bike, his grin sharp and dangerous. "Afternoon, Jax," he drawled. "Nice day for a little neighborhood improvement." "We're not looking for trouble, Rafe," Jackson said, his voice steady but firm. "Who said anything about trouble?" Rafe replied, feigning innocence. "We're just here to observe." The gang spread out, their presence an unmistakable threat. Travis and Diesel stood behind Jackson, their postures tense. Rory gripped their paintbrush tightly, unsure of what to do. "This is a public park," Rafe continued, his tone mocking. "We've got every right to be here." "You've made your point," Jackson said. "Now leave." Rafe's grin widened. "Or what? You gonna call the cops? That doesn't seem like your style, Jax." The standoff stretched into an unbearable silence. Rory glanced at Jackson, whose jaw was clenched so tightly they thought it might crack. "Look," Rory said, stepping forward despite the knot of fear in their stomach. We're just trying to make this neighborhood better. If you're not here to help, then leave. Otherwise, you're just proving how little you actually care about this place." Rafe's gaze snapped to them, his expression darkening. "And who are you to tell me what I care about?" "Someone who's not afraid of you," Rory shot back, their voice steady despite their racing heart. Rafe's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Jackson stepped between them. "That's enough," he said, his tone sharp. "You've had your fun. Now go." For a moment, it seemed like Rafe might push further, but then he laughed, a low, menacing sound. "You've changed, Jax. I'm almost disappointed." With a wave of his hand, Rafe signaled his crew to follow. They mounted their bikes and roared off, the sound fading into the distance. The group let out a collective breath they hadn't realized they were holding. "That was close," Diesel muttered. "Too close," Jackson agreed, his shoulders still tense. Rory glanced at him. "You think he'll be back?" Jackson nodded. "Definitely." "What do we do?" Travis asked, his usual bravado replaced with genuine worry. "We keep working," Jackson said firmly. "We don't let him scare us into stopping." The resolve in his voice was enough to steel the group's nerves. They returned to their work, their movements slower but no less determined. The mural began to take shape again, its bright colors a stark contrast to the dark clouds overhead. By the time they finished for the day, the storm in the sky had finally broken. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, soaking them as they packed up their supplies. But despite the weather, and despite Rafe's threat, there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. As they huddled under a nearby awning, waiting for the rain to let up, Rory turned to Jackson. "You handled that well," they said. Jackson shrugged, water dripping from his hair. "Could have gone worse." "It didn't, though," Rory said, "and that's because of you." Jackson didn't respond, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at his lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That night, as Rory lay in bed listening to the rain, they thought about the day's events. Rafe's gang was a looming threat, but so was the sense of purpose they'd found in their work. For every challenge they faced, there was a victory. Small, perhaps, but meaningful. One step at a time, Rory thought, their resolve strengthening. One step at a time. The morning after the storm was quiet, the streets washed clean by the night's rain. Rory arrived at the community center to find the group already gathered, their faces tense with unspoken worry. The confrontation with Rafe's gang lingered in the air like a bad memory, and it was clear no one had slept well. "We're finishing the mural today," Jackson said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If Rafe shows up again, we'll deal with it." Diesel crossed his arms. "And what if dealing with it isn't enough? The guy's got nothing better to do than mess with us." "We'll handle it," Jackson repeated, his voice firm. "We're not stopping." Rory glanced around the group, their hearts sinking at the unease in everyone's expressions. Even Travis, usually the loudest voice in the room, stayed silent. Someone had to say something, and Rory realized it was going to have to be them. "Jackson's right," Rory said, stepping forward. "We can't let Rafe intimidate us. This work matters. We've seen it. The people here have seen it. If we give up now, we're letting him win." The group fell silent, their eyes on Rory. The weight of their words hung in the air, and for a moment, Rory wondered if they'd made a mistake. Then Diesel nodded. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." Travis smirked, some of his usual confidence returning. "All right, fearless leader, let's finish this mural." Jackson gave Rory a brief nod, his expression unreadable. "Let's move." The mural was nearly complete, its vibrant colors and intricate design standing out against the gray concrete wall. The group worked with renewed focus, their brushes moving with purpose as they added the finishing touches. Rory found themselves caught up in the rhythm, the nervous energy from the morning fading as the mural came to life. The mural wasn't just art, it was a tapestry of the community's history and resilience. Rory painted scenes of children playing, elders sharing stories on benches, and shopkeepers tending to vibrant storefronts. Every stroke told a story, and with each new color, the wall seemed to come alive. Travis, surprisingly quiet, was adding details to the mural's upper edge. "You know," he said after a moment, "I didn't think I'd care about this, but this actually feels important." "It is important," Rory replied, pausing to look up at him, "and you're doing a good job." Travis grinned, his usual bravado tempered with something softer. "Yeah, well, don't get used to me being sentimental." By mid-afternoon, the unmistakable sound of motorcycles echoed down the street. Rory's stomach clenched as Rafe's gang appeared, their presence as unwelcome as a dark cloud. "Keep working," Jackson said, his voice steady. "Let me handle this." Rory hesitated, then stepped forward. "No, this time we handle it together." Jackson shot them a warning look, but Rory ignored it, their gaze fixed on Rafe as he dismounted his bike. "Well, well," Rafe said, his grin predatory. "Back at it, huh? You really don't know when to quit." "We're not quitting," Rory said, their voice calm but firm. "And neither should you." Rafe's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "This neighborhood doesn't need more threats," Rory continued, stepping closer. "It needs people who care. If you're so intent on proving you're in charge, why not do something that actually matters?" Rafe stared at them, his grin fading as his expression turned cold. "You've got a lot of nerve." "And you've got a lot of time to waste," Rory shot back. "Why not use it for something worthwhile?" Behind them, the group stood in silent solidarity, their presence a quiet show of support. Jackson stepped forward, his gaze locked on Rafe. "You heard them. This ends here." The tension thickened as Rafe and Jackson stared each other down. Rory's pulse raced, but they refused to back down. They could feel the weight of their friend's eyes on them, their support steadying Rory's resolve. For a moment, Rafe's expression wavered, as if he was weighing his options. Then, to everyone's surprise, he let out a sharp laugh, a sound that was more bitter than amused. "You think you've won something?" he said, shaking his head. "Fine. Keep your little project, but don't think this is over." With a sharp motion, he signaled his gang to follow. The roar of their engines faded into the distance, leaving the group standing in stunned silence. The rest of the day passed in a haze of focused determination. No one spoke much, but the tension had transformed into something else, an unspoken agreement to finish what they'd started. By evening, the mural was complete, its vibrant colors a testament to the group's resilience. Rory stepped back to admire the finished work, their chest swelling with pride. "It's beautiful," they said softly. Jackson nodded, his gaze lingering on the mural. "Yeah, it is." Travis crossed his arms, a satisfied grin on his face. "We did good." Diesel smirked. "Better than good." They stood in silence for a moment, taking in their creation. It wasn't just a mural, it was a symbol of everything they'd overcome together. "You think he meant what he said?" Rory asked, glancing at Jackson. Jackson's expression hardened. "Doesn't matter. We're not stopping." Rory nodded, their resolve firm. "Good. Neither am I." That night, as Rory walked home, the events of the day replayed in their mind. Rafe's parting words were a shadow over their thoughts, but so was the mural, its bright colors etched into their memory. It wasn't just paint on a wall. It was a declaration, a promise to keep moving forward. Small victories, Rory thought, their steps light despite the weight of the day. One step at a time. The mural stood as a testament to their effort, its vibrant colors bringing life to the once dull wall. For the first time in weeks, the group felt a sense of calm. But it didn't last. The shadow of Rafe's threat lingered, and the unease that followed them home the night before wasn't just paranoia, it was a warning. Rory arrived at the community center early the next morning to find Jackson already there, pacing near the truck. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by an air of frustration. "What's going on?" Rory asked, their voice cautious. "We've got a problem," Jackson replied, holding up a flyer. Rory took it and scanned the bold letters across the top. "Community vandalism exposed." Below the headline were photos of their murals, including the one they'd just completed. "What is this?" Rory asked, their stomachs sinking. "Rafe," Jackson said through gritted teeth. "He's trying to spin this as us defacing public property. He's already sent these to local businesses and the city council." Rory stared at the flyer, anger bubbling in their chest. "He's trying to turn everyone against us." "That's exactly what he's doing," Jackson replied. "And if he gets enough people to believe it, everything we've worked for could be shut down." The group convened shortly after, their faces mirroring the tension in the room. Travis was the first to speak. "So, what? We just let him ruin everything?" "Of course not," Rory said firmly. "We fight back." "With what?" Diesel asked. "It's his word against ours, and he's already ahead." "We have the community," Rory said. "People have seen the work we've done. They've thanked us. We need to remind them why we're here." "And how do we do that?" Travis asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "By being louder than Rafe," Rory replied. "We organize a community event, something that shows everyone what this project is really about." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about a public demonstration?" "Exactly," Rory said. "We invite everyone who's benefited from our work, the shop owners, the families at the park, even Mrs. Flores. We show them the impact this project has had." The group exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Jackson nodded. "It's risky, but it's worth a shot." Planning the event was no small task. The group divided responsibilities, with Rory and Jackson taking charge of outreach while Travis and Diesel worked on logistics. They spent hours going door to door, handing out flyers and talking to neighbors. To their relief, many people were eager to support them. "I've seen what you've done for this neighborhood," Mrs. Flores said when Rory visited her bakery. "Count me in." A local artist offered to set up a display near the mural, showcasing their work alongside the group's efforts. A few families volunteered to bring food and drinks. Slowly but surely, the event began to take shape. One evening, as they reviewed their plans, Travis spoke up. "Do you think this'll really change anything?" "It's not about changing Rafe's mind," Rory said. "It's about showing him, and everyone else, that we won't back down. This neighborhood deserves better, and we're going to prove it." The day of the event dawned clear and bright, the sky a perfect canvas of blue. The group arrived early to set up, their nerves hidden behind determined faces. Rory could feel the weight of the day pressing on their shoulders, but they pushed it aside. There was too much at stake. By mid-morning, people began to arrive. Families with strollers, teenagers on bikes, and shopkeepers in aprons all gathered near the mural. The energy was contagious, the air buzzing with conversations and laughter. Rory took a deep breath and stepped onto the small makeshift stage they'd set up. The crowd quieted, their attention shifting to Rory. "Thank you all for being here today," Rory began, their voice steady despite the nerves churning in their stomach. "This project started as a way to give back to the community, to show that we care about this neighborhood and the people in it." They paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "But it's become more than that. It's about resilience, about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, and it's about proving that together we can make a difference." Applause erupted, the sound washing over Rory like a wave. For the first time in days, they felt hope. The event was a resounding success. Local news reporters showed up, interviewing the group and members of the community. Shop owners shared stories of how the murals and repairs had boosted their businesses. Parents spoke about how the revitalized park had become a safe space for their kids. At one point, a young boy approached Rory, clutching a small drawing in his hands. "This is for you," he said shyly. It was a crayon drawing of the mural, complete with smiling faces and colorful skies. Rory knelt down to accept it, their chest tightening with emotion. "Thank you," Rory said softly. "This means a lot." By the end of the day, it was clear that Rafe's smear campaign had failed. The community wasn't just supporting the project, they were defending it. Later that evening, as the group packed up, Jackson turned to Rory. "You were right," he said. "This was exactly what we needed." Rory smiled, exhaustion tugging at the corners of their mouth. "We're not done yet, but this is a good start." Jackson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Rafe won't stop, but neither will we." Rory met his gaze, their resolve mirrored in his eyes. One step at a time. The community event had been a success, but the aftershocks of Rafe's campaign still lingered. Over the following days, Rory began noticing small signs of resistance. A graffiti tag appeared near one of their murals, mocking their efforts. A few business owners, previously supportive, started avoiding eye contact. Whispers followed them when they walked through the neighborhood. Rory arrived at the community center one morning to find Jackson waiting for them. He was leaning against the truck, arms crossed, his face set in a grim expression. "Something's up," he said as soon as Rory approached. "What now?" Rory asked, bracing themselves. Jackson handed them his phone. On the screen was a post from a local social media group. The caption read, "Are these so-called community helpers really making a difference, or are they just stirring up trouble?" Comments ranged from cautious support to outright hostility. Rory frowned, scrolling through the responses. This is exactly what Rafe wants. He's planting doubt. Jackson nodded. And it's working. People are starting to question if we're doing more harm than good. Rory's stomach churned. We need to talk to the others. The group convened later that morning, their usual banter replaced by uneasy silence. Rory showed them the post, their voice steady despite the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "This is what we're up against," Rory said. "Rafe's not just trying to stop us, he's trying to divide the community." Travis leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "So, what do we do? Post a reply? Call him out?" "No," Rory said firmly. "That's exactly what he wants. If we react emotionally, we play into his hands." "Then what?" Diesel asked. "We just ignore it?" "Not ignore," Rory replied. "We stay focused. We keep working, keep showing people what we're about. Actions speak louder than words." The group exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Jackson spoke. "Rory's right. We can't get dragged into a war of words. The only way to prove him wrong is by finishing what we started." Over the next few days, the group threw themselves into their work. They completed another mural, restored a crumbling bench in the park, and repainted a neglected playground. The tension in the air was palpable, but they refused to let it slow them down. One afternoon, as Rory was touching up the edges of the playground fence, an older woman approached them. She wore a faded floral dress and carried a shopping bag. "Excuse me," she said, her voice hesitant. "Are you the ones fixing up the neighborhood?" Rory set down their brush and nodded. "That's us. Can I help you?" The woman hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I don't have much, but I wanted to donate to your project. It's not right what people are saying about you. You've done more for this place in a month than most have done in years." Rory felt a lump form in their throat as they accepted the envelope. "Thank you. That means a lot." The woman smiled, her eyes warm. "Don't let them get to you. The people who matter see what you're doing." Despite moments of encouragement like this, the strain on the group was beginning to show. Travis snapped at Diesel during a routine repair job, and Jackson had grown even quieter than usual. Rory felt the weight of everyone's doubts pressing down on them, their own included. One evening, as they packed up their supplies, Jackson approached Rory. "You okay?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. Rory sighed, leaning against the truck. "I'm trying to be." Jackson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've been holding everyone together. That's not easy." "It doesn't feel like enough," Rory admitted. "Every step forward feels like 2 steps back." Jackson was silent for a moment. Then he said, "It's not about winning every fight. It's about not giving up. You've kept us going when things got tough. That's what matters." Rory looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thanks, Jackson." He shrugged, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. "Don't let it go to your head." By the end of the week, things began to shift. A local news outlet published an article highlighting the group's work, countering some of Rafe's narrative. More residents started stopping by to thank them, and the whispers turned into words of support. One evening, as the group worked on a new project, a small crowd gathered to watch. A young girl approached Travis, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you painting that?" she asked, pointing to the mural he was working on. "Yeah," Travis said, crouching to her level. "What do you think?" The girl beamed. "It's pretty." Her mother stepped forward, smiling. "She's been asking about the murals ever since you started. Thank you for what you're doing." Travis glanced at Rory, his usual bravado replaced with something softer. "Thanks. That means a lot." That night, as they packed up, Rory reflected on the past week. The fallout from Rafe's campaign had been hard, but it had also shown them the strength of the community they were fighting for. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The mural on the wall nearby seemed to glow faintly in the dim evening light, a reminder of how far they had come. Rory traced the bold lines in their mind, feeling pride swell despite the challenges. Small victories, Rory thought, their resolve solidifying. The days following the group's tentative victory against Rafe's smear campaign were quieter, yet a strange tension lingered. The work continued, but the camaraderie that once defined the group seemed to falter. Conversations were shorter, laughs less frequent. It was as though everyone was waiting for the next storm. Rory felt the strain acutely. As much as they tried to hold everything together, it was clear that the group was struggling. Diesel avoided eye contact with Travis, and even Jackson's usual reassuring presence felt distant. Something had to change, and Rory was determined to make it happen. One afternoon, Rory decided to address the elephant in the room. The group was gathered near the park, repainting an old sign that had long been neglected. Travis worked silently on the lettering while Diesel scrubbed at the rusted posts. "All right," Rory said, setting down their brush. "We need to talk." Travis didn't look up. "About what?" "About this," Rory said, gesturing to the group. "The way we've all been acting. I know things have been hard, but we're supposed to be a team, and right now, it doesn't feel like one." Diesel snorted. "What's there to talk about? We're all tired, Rory. It's not that deep." "It is that deep," Rory insisted. "We've been through too much to start falling apart now." Travis finally looked up, his jaw tight. "So what do you want us to do? Sit around and sing Kumbaya?" "No," Rory said evenly, "but we can at least be honest with each other. If something's bothering you, say it." Jackson, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Rory's right. We've let too much fester. If we don't deal with it now, it's only going to get worse." The group moved to a shaded area near the park, sitting in a loose circle on the grass. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Diesel broke the silence. "Fine. You want honesty? I'm pissed that we keep busting our asses and it still feels like we're getting nowhere. Every time we fix something, Rafe or someone else finds a way to tear it down." Travis nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Yeah, it's like no matter what we do, it's never enough." Rory listened, their chest tightening at the raw frustration in their voices. "I get it. I really do. But that's why we're doing this, to show that we won't give up, even when it's hard." "It's just," Diesel trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's hard to keep going when it feels like the world's against you." Jackson leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. "It is hard, but we're not doing this for the world. We're doing it for the people who see the good in it, for the kid who smiles when he sees a new mural, or the shopkeeper who finally has a clean storefront. That's what matters." The words seemed to settle over the group, a quiet reminder of why they had started this work in the first place. The conversation gradually shifted, the group opening up about their frustrations and fears. Travis admitted that he sometimes felt out of place, like he didn't belong in a group that cared so much about something bigger than themselves. Diesel confessed that he worried he wasn't making a real difference no matter how hard he worked. Rory shared their own doubts, their voice steady despite the vulnerability of their words. There are nights when I lie awake wondering if this is worth it, if we're really making a difference or if we're just spinning our wheels, but then I think about the people who've thanked us, who've told us we've made their lives a little brighter, and I realize that even small changes matter. For the first time in days, the tension seemed to ease. The group sat together in comfortable silence. The weight of their unspoken fears finally lifted. The faint chirping of crickets filled the air, blending with the distant sound of laughter from children at the park. The world felt a little less heavy. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Rory approached Jackson while the others packed up their supplies. "Hey," Rory said, their tone lighter than it had been in days. "Thanks for backing me up earlier." Jackson shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You didn't need my help. You've always been good at getting people to open up." Rory chuckled. "Still, it means a lot." Jackson's smile faded slightly, his expression turning serious. "You know, you're not the only one carrying this weight. We're all in this together. Don't forget that." Rory nodded, their chest warming at his words. "I won't. Thanks, Jackson." That night, as Rory walked home, the events of the day played over in their mind. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. The group had faced their fears and found strength in each other. And for the first time in weeks, Rory felt a glimmer of hope. The mural nearby seemed to glow faintly in the dim evening light, its colors blending with the shadows of the night. Rory stopped to admire it, their thoughts swirling. It wasn't just paint on a wall. It was a symbol of resilience, of refusing to back down no matter the odds. They took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill their lungs. The world still felt heavy, but it also felt manageable. They weren't alone. And for Rory, that made all the difference. Jackson sat alone on the stoop outside his apartment, the last traces of sunlight fading into the horizon. The dim glow of a street lamp illuminated his face, highlighting the creases of thought etched across his brow. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. Jackson liked these moments of stillness. It was when he did his best thinking. Lately, his thoughts had been dominated by the group, their progress and their struggles. But there was something deeper gnawing at him, a restlessness that had been building for years. He knew it wasn't just about the murals or Rafe's sabotage. It was about his own choices and the life he'd built around them. The next morning, Jackson arrived at the community center earlier than usual. Rory was already there, sipping a cup of coffee and going over plans for their next project. "You're early," Rory said, glancing up with a small smile. "Couldn't sleep," Jackson replied, settling into a chair across from them. "Figured I'd make myself useful." Rory nodded, sensing the weight in his tone. "Everything okay?" Jackson hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking about the gang, about what we're doing here. It's like we're stuck in this cycle, you know? We clean up one mess, and another one takes its place. It feels like no matter how hard we try, we're just spinning our wheels." Rory set down their coffee, their gaze steady. "I know it feels that way sometimes, but every time we break one cycle, even a small one, it creates a ripple. It's not about fixing everything at once. It's about creating the chance for something better." Jackson considered their words, a flicker of hope stirring within him. What if we did more than just clean up the messes? What if we broke the cycle completely? Rory tilted their head, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Jackson said slowly, "that it's time to disband the gang. For good." The idea hung in the air, heavy with its implications. Rory leaned back in their chair, processing Jackson's words. "That's a big decision," they said carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Jackson nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Yeah, it's been a long time coming. The gang. It started as a way to survive, to find a place where we belonged. But now, it's just holding us back. I want more than that. For me, for them." Rory smiled softly. "It's a brave choice, and it makes sense. If anyone can lead them into something better, it's you." The two spent the rest of the morning discussing Jackson's plan. They talked about how to approach the gang, how to explain his decision, and what steps they could take to ensure the transition was as smooth as possible. Later that evening, Jackson called a meeting with the gang. They gathered in a dusty warehouse on the outskirts of the neighborhood, the same place where they'd held countless meetings before. The air was thick with anticipation as the gang members exchanged curious glances. Jackson stood at the front of the room, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to say. "I've been thinking a lot about where we're headed," he began, his voice steady, "about what we've built and what it's done for us, and I've realized it's time for a change." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. "What kind of change?" one of the members asked cautiously. Jackson met their gaze. "It's time to disband the gang." The room erupted into murmurs, a mix of confusion and disbelief. Jackson held up a hand, signaling for silence. "Listen," he said firmly. "I know this is a lot to take in, but think about it. What has this gang really given us? We've spent so much time fighting, surviving, and trying to prove ourselves. But what have we actually built? What legacy are we leaving behind?" The murmurs quieted as his words sank in. Jackson continued, his tone earnest. "I'm not saying this is the end. I'm saying it's a new beginning. We have the chance to take everything we've learned, everything we've fought for, and use it to build something real, something that lasts." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Travis stepped forward, his expression conflicted. "And what would we do instead?" he asked. "We start fresh," Jackson said. "We take the skills we've got and use them to help the community, to build instead of destroy." Travis nodded slowly, his eyes searching Jackson's face for answers. "It's not going to be easy." "It never is," Jackson replied, "but it'll be worth it." One by one, the gang members began to voice their thoughts. Some were hesitant, clinging to the familiarity of their old life. Others were cautiously optimistic, intrigued by the possibility of something new. By the end of the night, they had reached a consensus. It was time to break the cycle. The next day, the group gathered at the community center to finalize their plans. Rory had reached out to their network, securing resources and connections to help the gang transition into their new roles. It was a monumental task, but the energy in the room was palpable, a mix of determination and hope. As they worked, Jackson caught Rory's eye and offered a small smile. "Thanks for believing in this. In me." Rory smiled back. "You've always had it in you, Jackson. It just took a little time to see it." For the first time in a long while, Jackson felt a sense of peace. The days following Jackson's decision to disband the gang were filled with a flurry of activity. The once rough crew found themselves in unfamiliar territory, trading late-night standoffs for early morning meetings. It wasn't an easy transition, but Jackson's determination was infectious, and Rory's organizational skills kept things on track. The first order of business was setting a new direction. Jackson had been clear about wanting to use their skills to give back to the community, but the specifics were murky. The group gathered in the community center one morning, their energy a mix of apprehension and cautious optimism. Rory stood at the front of the room, a large notepad on an easel beside them. "All right," they began, tapping the marker against the pad. "Let's start by listing out what we're good at. Skills, talents, anything we can use to make a difference." Diesel raised a hand, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Breaking things doesn't count, right? The group chuckled, the tension in the room easing slightly. Only if you can put them back together, Rory replied with a grin. Travis leaned forward in his chair. We're good at fixing stuff. Bikes, cars, even some construction work. We've done a lot of patch jobs over the years. Rory jotted it down. That's a start. What else? Another member spoke up, their voice hesitant. We're creative. I mean, those murals we've been working on, they look amazing. Good point, Rory said, adding it to the list. Anything else? Jackson crossed his arms, his gaze steady. We're good at getting people together, rallying them, keeping them focused. That's a skill too. The list grew as more members contributed, the room buzzing with ideas. By the end of the session, they had a solid foundation to build on. The group decided to focus on two main initiatives: restoring neglected spaces and teaching creative skills to local youth. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Rory reached out to their network, securing donations of paint, tools, and supplies. Jackson took charge of rallying the group, organizing shifts, and assigning tasks. Travis and Diesel, despite their initial skepticism, threw themselves into the work with surprising enthusiasm. One of their first projects was transforming an abandoned lot into a community garden. The space had been an eyesore for years, overgrown with weeds and littered with debris. The group spent days clearing it out, their efforts drawing curious onlookers from the neighborhood. By the time they planted the first batch of flowers and vegetables, the lot had become a symbol of transformation. Children played along the edges, their laughter blending with the hum of conversation as neighbors stopped by to lend a hand. As the garden project wrapped up, the group shifted their focus to their next initiative, a series of workshops for local youth. The idea had been Jackson's, inspired by his own struggles to find direction when he was younger. Kids like us need a place to belong, he said one evening as they sketched out plans. A place where they can learn, create, and figure out who they are. The workshops covered everything from street art to basic mechanics, each session designed to teach practical skills while fostering creativity. Rory took the lead on organizing the schedule, while Jackson and Travis handled the hands-on demonstrations. At first, attendance was sparse, but word spread quickly, and within weeks, the workshops were packed. Teenagers who had once loitered aimlessly on street corners now spent their afternoons learning how to build and paint. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the hum of activity and the spark of newfound purpose. One afternoon, as Jackson worked with a group of kids on a mural, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. It was Marcus, a former gang member who had drifted away years earlier. He watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. "Hey," Jackson called out, setting down his paintbrush. "Didn't think I'd see you here." Marcus shrugged, stepping closer. "Didn't think I'd come. Heard what you're doing, though. Figured I'd check it out." Jackson gestured to the mural. "You want to join in? We could use the help." For a moment, Marcus hesitated. Then he nodded, rolling up his sleeves. "Yeah, why not?" By the end of the day, Marcus had not only helped with the mural but had also signed up to assist with the workshops. His presence was a reminder of how far they'd come, and how far they still had to go. As the weeks turned into months, the group's efforts began to ripple through the neighborhood. Graffiti-covered walls became vibrant murals. Vacant lots turned into gardens and gathering spaces. Kids who once saw no future now spoke of dreams they hadn't dared to voice before. One evening, as the group gathered to celebrate their progress, Rory raised a toast. "To breaking cycles," they said, their voice steady with conviction. "And to building something better." The room erupted into cheers, the sound carrying into the night. Jackson stood at the edge of the room, watching his friends and neighbors. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with survival or status. It was a feeling rooted in purpose, in the simple yet profound act of creating something good. As the celebration continued, he caught Rory's eye and smiled. They had done it, together, and they weren't done yet. The initial successes of Jackson and Rory's initiatives brought a wave of optimism to the group. The garden was thriving, the workshops were packed, and the community was beginning to see the changes they had long hoped for. But with progress came challenges, and the cracks in their newfound purpose were beginning to show. One morning, Rory arrived at the community center to find Jackson pacing outside, his expression stormy. "What's going on?" Rory asked, unlocking the door. Jackson huffed, running a hand through his hair. "One of the neighbors filed a complaint about the mural on 8th Street, said it's too loud. They want it taken down." Rory frowned. "Seriously? That mural was their idea in the first place." "Yeah, well, people change their minds when their friends start talking," Jackson muttered. "Now they're saying it's making the neighborhood look cheap." Rory sighed, setting their bag on the table inside. "It's just one complaint. We've dealt with worse." Jackson didn't look convinced. "It's not just the complaint, Rory. The hardware store canceled their donation yesterday, and Diesel said someone vandalized the garden last night." The weight of his words settled between them. Rory felt a flicker of doubt but pushed it aside. "All right, let's regroup. We'll figure this out." The challenges kept piling up over the next few weeks. The group's resources were stretched thin, and tensions began to flare among its members. Diesel and Travis, once thick as thieves, had a shouting match during a workshop over how to allocate materials. Some of the younger participants started skipping sessions, and a rumor spread that Rafe was stirring up trouble again. Rory found themselves staying up late most nights, scribbling ideas and drafting proposals to keep the momentum alive. One night, as they stared at the cluttered desk in their apartment, they felt the familiar tug of self-doubt. What if this isn't enough? What if we fail? The thought lingered, heavy and unwelcome, but before it could root itself too deeply, Rory shook their head and picked up the phone. They needed reinforcements. The next day, Rory called a meeting. The group gathered in the community center, their usual energy dampened by the string of setbacks. "We need to talk about what's been happening," Rory began, their tone calm but firm. "I know it's been tough lately. We've hit some bumps, but that's part of the process. Change isn't easy, and it's not always pretty." Diesel crossed his arms. "Pretty sure this is more than just bumps, Rory. We're losing support left and right. People are bailing." "Because they're scared," Rory countered. "Change can be intimidating. It's easier to complain or pull away than to stick it out, but that doesn't mean we're failing." Jackson chimed in, his voice steady. "Rory's right. We knew this wasn't going to be easy. If we back down now, we're proving everyone who doubted us right." Travis, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "So, what do we do? How do we get people back on board?" "We remind them why we started this," Rory said. "We double down on what's working. The garden, the workshops, they're making a difference. We focus on that and build from there." The group threw themselves back into their work with renewed determination. They repainted the vandalized sections of the garden, adding colorful patterns and encouraging kids to join in. Jackson organized a neighborhood cleanup day, drawing dozens of volunteers who hadn't been involved before. But the turning point came during a workshop. Rory had invited a local artist to give a talk on the power of community-driven art. The artist shared stories of murals that had transformed neighborhoods, bringing people together in ways they hadn't thought possible. As the session ended, one of the teenagers lingered behind. He was a quiet kid named Mateo who rarely spoke during the workshops. "Hey," he said, shuffling his feet. "That talk was cool. I didn't know art could do all that." Rory smiled. "It can, and you're part of it now. That mural you worked on, it's already making an impact." Mateo nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think I want to do more of this. Maybe even teach someday." The exchange lit a spark in Rory's chest. It was a reminder of why they were doing this, why they had started in the first place. As the weeks went on, the group slowly began to rebuild their momentum. The setbacks hadn't disappeared, but they had learned to navigate them with resilience and creativity. Neighbors who had once been skeptical began to lend their support, and even the complaints about the murals faded as people saw the positive changes spreading through the community. One evening, as the group packed up after a particularly productive day, Jackson turned to Rory. "You were right," he said simply. "About what?" Rory asked, arching an eyebrow. "About doubling down. About not letting the setbacks stop us. We wouldn't be here without you." Rory chuckled, their cheeks flushing. "We wouldn't be here without all of us. This is a team effort, Jackson." "Yeah," Jackson agreed, a rare smile breaking across his face. "But every team needs a leader." As they locked up the community center and walked into the cool night air, Rory felt a sense of quiet pride. The road ahead was still long, but they were moving forward, together. The neighborhood was buzzing with activity as the group's efforts continued to take root. Each day brought new challenges, but also victories, moments that reminded them why they had started. The garden was flourishing, the workshops inspired young minds, and the murals became a source of pride. Yet, Rory couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. One afternoon, as they supervised a mural project on 6th Avenue, a figure approached from the far end of the alley. At first, Rory didn't recognize him, but as he drew closer, they froze. It was Dane, the leader of the rival gang that had clashed with Jackson's crew countless times. "Rory!" Dane called out, his voice rough but steady. Rory tensed, their mind racing. Why was Dane here? Trouble seemed inevitable. They glanced at Jackson, who had noticed him too. Jackson's expression darkened as he stepped forward, putting himself between Dane and the group. "What do you want?" Jackson asked coldly. Dane raised his hands, palms out. "Relax. I'm not here to fight." "Then why are you here?" Rory asked cautiously. Dane hesitated, his gaze shifting between them. "I heard about what you're doing. The workshops, the garden, the murals. It's good. Different." Jackson folded his arms, his skepticism clear. "And? You came to tell us you're a fan?" Dane smirked faintly, but there was no malice in it. "Not exactly. I came to see if you'd let me help." The words hung in the air, heavy with their implications. Rory exchanged a glance with Jackson, who looked as stunned as they felt. "You want to help?" Jackson repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. Dane nodded. "Yeah. Look, I know we've had our issues." "Our issues?" Jackson interrupted. "You mean the years of fighting, threats, and stunts you pulled?" Dane held up a hand. "I'm not proud of that, all right? But things are different now. My crew's falling apart, and honestly, I'm tired of it. I see what you're building, and I want to be part of it. I want something better." Rory studied Dane's face, searching for deception. Instead, they saw something unexpected. Sincerity. "Why now?" Rory asked. "Why not months ago?" Dane sighed. "Because I didn't think it was possible. Not until I saw you do it. You turned your crew around, Jackson. That's not easy." Jackson's jaw tightened. Rory stepped forward, their voice calm but firm. "If you're serious, it won't be easy. You'll have to prove yourself." "I get that," Dane said. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The decision to let Dane join was met with mixed reactions. Travis was vocal in his distrust, while Diesel was surprisingly open. "If he's serious, why not give him a chance?" he argued. Jackson remained quiet, visibly conflicted. Ultimately, Rory made the call. "We give him a trial period," they said. "He works with us on a few projects, and if he proves himself, he stays. If not, he's out." Jackson nodded. "But if he steps out of line, even once, he's gone." Dane's trial began with a workshop. He arrived early, surprising everyone, and started helping set up. Rory watched closely as he interacted with the kids, offering advice and encouragement without trying to take over. By the end of the day, even Travis grudgingly admitted Dane had done a decent job. The next project was a mural on a crumbling wall near the community center. Dane worked alongside the others, his usual bravado replaced by quiet determination. A passerby stopped to admire the mural and asked Dane about the design. For the first time, he spoke openly about the meaning behind the art, his voice tinged with pride. During one session, Rory noticed Dane taking extra time with a shy participant struggling with the techniques. Dane's patience and encouragement surprised everyone, especially Rory. It was a stark contrast to the brash and confrontational leader he'd once been. One evening during cleanup, Dane lingered after the others left. He stood silently in front of a nearly completed mural, tracing his fingers along the edge of the wall as if absorbing its meaning. Rory approached cautiously. "Everything all right?" they asked. Dane nodded, then turned to face them. "I never thought I'd care about something like this," he admitted. "Art? Community? It felt like stuff for other people, not guys like me." "Why do you think that?" Rory asked, genuinely curious. Dane shrugged. "Because I spent so much time breaking things apart, I didn't think I could build anything worth keeping." Rory smiled softly. "Well, you're proving yourself wrong." As the weeks passed, Dane's presence became less of a novelty and more of a norm. The group's initial wariness began to fade, replaced by cautious camaraderie. He stepped up consistently, supporting the team and going above and beyond when needed. One evening, as the group cleaned up after a workshop, Dane approached Jackson. "Got a minute?" he asked. Jackson crossed his arms. "What's on your mind?" Dane hesitated, his usual confidence replaced by vulnerability. I wanted to say thanks for giving me a chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying to make the most of it." Jackson studied him for a moment before nodding. "You've done good so far. Just keep it up." Dane nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. "I will." By the end of Dane's trial, it was clear to everyone that he had earned his place. The once rival gang leader had become an unexpected ally, strengthening the group in ways they hadn't anticipated. As they gathered to celebrate another successful project, Rory raised a toast. "To new allies," they said, their voice steady, "and to the power of second chances." The group cheered, their voices ringing out into the night. For the first time, Rory felt their efforts had created something unbreakable, a community built on trust, resilience, and the belief that even the most unlikely allies could find common ground. The community center buzzed with activity as the group prepared for their biggest event yet, a neighborhood festival to celebrate the progress they had made together. Weeks of planning had culminated in this moment, and the air was thick with anticipation. Food stalls lined the sidewalks, vibrant banners hung from lampposts, and the smell of grilled meat and fresh bread wafted through the streets. Everywhere Rory looked, they saw signs of life and unity. Jackson stood near the stage overseeing the final preparations. His typical scowl had been replaced by a look of quiet pride as he watched the volunteers set up chairs and string lights. Dane was nearby, hauling equipment and cracking jokes with a group of teenagers who had joined the workshops. Rory couldn't help but smile. The scene felt almost surreal, a testament to how far they had come. The festival began with a flurry of energy. Local musicians took the stage, their lively performances drawing a growing crowd. Children darted between booths, clutching painted balloons and sticky candy apples, while their parents browsed handmade crafts and chatted with neighbors. The garden, now lush and full of life, served as a quiet oasis where older residents gathered to share stories and admire the blooms. Rory made their way through the crowd, stopping to greet familiar faces and check on the various activities. At one point, they stumbled upon Mateo, the shy teenager who had discovered his passion for art during one of the workshops. He was standing by a canvas, his hands stained with paint as he guided a small group of kids in creating their own masterpiece. "Looking good, Mateo," Rory said, stepping closer. Matteo beamed, a far cry from the reserved boy he had been months ago. Thanks. I can't believe how many people showed up. It's kind of amazing. It is, Rory agreed, their chest swelling with pride. And you're a big part of why this is happening. Matteo flushed, but didn't argue. He turned back to his group, his voice animated as he encouraged a young girl to add more color to her piece. Rory watched for a moment longer before moving on, their heart full. As the afternoon wore on, the festival reached its peak. The mural unveiling was the centerpiece of the event, and a large crowd had gathered in front of the community center to witness it. Jackson took the microphone, his voice steady as he addressed the audience. "This mural represents more than just art," he began, his eyes scanning the crowd. "It's a symbol of what we can accomplish when we come together, when we choose to build instead of tear down. A few months ago, none of this seemed possible. But now, standing here with all of you, I know we can keep going. We can make this neighborhood better. For everyone." The crowd erupted into applause as the curtain dropped, revealing a breathtaking mural that spanned the length of the wall. It depicted scenes of unity and resilience, hands of different colors clasped together, a garden in full bloom, children playing beneath a bright sun. At the center was an image of the community center itself, surrounded by the people who had brought it back to life. Tears pricked Rory's eyes as they took in the mural. It was more than just a piece of art. It was a reflection of everything they had worked for. The celebration continued into the evening, the festival transforming into a lively block party. Strings of lights cast a warm glow over the streets as people danced to the music and shared stories over plates of food. Rory found themselves standing by the garden, a rare moment of solitude amidst the bustle. "You look like you could use a break," Jackson said, appearing at their side with 2 cups of lemonade. Rory laughed, accepting the drink. "I didn't think we'd pull it off, but look at this. It's perfect." Jackson nodded, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "We did good." Rory turned to him, their expression serious. "We did more than good, Jackson. We created something real, something that'll last." Jackson didn't reply immediately, but the slight smile on his face said everything. They stood in companionable silence, watching as Dane helped a group of kids set up a makeshift dance floor. The transformation he had undergone was nothing short of remarkable, and Rory couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Later that night, as the festival began to wind down, Rory took the stage to thank everyone who had made it possible. "This isn't just about what we've done," they said, their voice carrying over the quieting crowd. "It's about what we're going to do. This is only the beginning. Together, we can keep building, keep growing, and keep proving that change is possible." The applause was deafening, a wave of support that washed over Rory like a warm embrace. As they stepped off the stage, they felt a hand on their shoulder. It was Dane, his expression uncharacteristically soft. "Nice speech," he said. "You're good at this." "Thanks," Rory replied, their smile genuine. "But it's not just me. It's all of us." Dane nodded, his gaze drifting back to the mural. "Yeah, all of us." As the last of the festival-goers drifted away, Rory lingered by the mural, tracing the painted lines with their fingers. Jackson joined them, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. "This was a win," he said simply. "It was," Rory agreed. "But it's not the end. There's still so much to do." Jackson chuckled, a low, warm sound. "There's always more to do. But tonight, we celebrate." Rory smiled, their heart full as they stood shoulder to shoulder with Jackson. For the first time in a long while, they felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead was still long, but for now, they could savor this moment of victory. The aftermath of the festival left the neighborhood buzzing with energy, but with the event concluded, an air of finality began to settle over the group. The weeks that followed were filled with quieter moments, the kind that often precede big changes. It was as though everyone knew the end of an era was approaching, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Rory sat in the community center one evening, flipping through a scrapbook one of the kids had put together. It was filled with photos from the workshops, the garden, and the festival. Each image was a testament to how much had changed. Faces that had once been wary and closed off now shone with pride and joy. Jackson entered the room, his steps uncharacteristically soft. "That book got you thinking?" he asked, pulling out a chair and sitting across from Rory. Rory smiled faintly. "It's hard not to. Look at all this, Jackson. We built something amazing." He nodded, his gaze lingering on a photo of the mural. "Yeah, we did, but you've got that look, like you're thinking about what's next." "I guess I am," Rory admitted. "This was always meant to be temporary, right? A stepping stone, but it's hard to imagine stepping away." "Who says you have to?" Jackson asked lightly. Rory met his eyes. "Do you really think we can keep this going forever?" Jackson didn't reply immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, the weight of the question settling between them. "I don't know about forever, but long enough to make a real difference? Yeah, I think we can." The conversation left Rory with more questions than answers. Over the next few days, they noticed a similar energy among the others. Diesel seemed unusually sentimental, offering advice to younger participants. Travis worked harder than ever on the final mural project. Even Dane carried a quiet determination. One evening, Dane lingered after a meeting. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked. "Feel what?" Rory asked. "That this is, I don't know, a turning point, like things are about to change." Rory nodded slowly. "I've been feeling it for weeks." Dane smiled a little wistfully. "I never thought I'd care this much about something. But this has been the best thing I've ever done." "Me too," Rory admitted. "But change isn't always bad, Dane. Sometimes it's what we need to grow." Dane hesitated before replying. "Yeah, I know. I just hope that even after we step back, people remember why we started this." "They will," Rory said firmly. "We've planted something real here." The next morning, Jackson called an impromptu meeting. The group gathered in the community center, subdued but focused. Jackson stood at the front of the room, his hands in his jacket pockets. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he began. "We've done a lot, more than I ever thought we could, but I think it's time to step back, to let this thing we've built stand on its own." The room was silent. Rory glanced around, seeing pride, sadness, and a touch of fear on everyone's faces. "None of this means we're giving up," Jackson continued. "It just means we're trusting the people we've inspired to keep it going. And if they need us, we'll be here. But it's time to let them lead." Diesel broke the silence. "So, what's the plan? Do we just walk away?" "Not exactly," Rory said. "We transition. We help set up the systems they'll need to keep this running. Then, when the time is right, we step back. We've always talked about building something that lasts. This is how we do it." The group worked tirelessly over the next few weeks. They organized leadership workshops, trained volunteers, and documented everything from schedules to fundraising strategies. Watching others step up reminded them of how far they had come. One evening, as they finished a mural, Mateo approached Rory and Jackson. "I've been thinking," he said hesitantly. "Maybe I could help run the workshops. I know I'm still learning, but I want to try." Jackson clapped him on the shoulder. "You'd be great at it, kid. You've got the passion and the skills." Rory smiled. "We'll guide you if you need it, but I have no doubt you'll do amazing." The final gathering of the group was both a celebration and a farewell. They met in the garden, surrounded by the fruits of their labor. There was laughter and storytelling, but also quiet reflection. As the evening wore on, Jackson stood to address the group. "This has been the ride of a lifetime," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "We came together to fix what was broken, and we ended up building something none of us could have imagined. I'm proud of all of you, and I'm proud of what we've done." Rory followed, their voice soft but clear. "This isn't goodbye. It's just a new chapter. We've planted the seeds, and now it's time to let them grow. Trust that what we've built is strong enough to last." The group raised their glasses in a final toast. "To new beginnings," Jackson said. "To new beginnings," they echoed. As the night came to an end, Rory lingered by the mural, tracing the painted lines one last time. Jackson joined them, his presence grounding. "You ready for what's next?" he asked. "I think so," Rory replied, "but I'm going to miss this." "Me too," Jackson admitted. "But we did good, Rory. Real good." They stood in silence, the weight of everything they had accomplished settling between them. Then, with a shared look, they turned and walked away, leaving the mural and the legacy they had built behind. The air felt different now. Months had passed since Rory and Jackson had walked away from the mural that symbolized everything they had built. The neighborhood, once marred by neglect, now thrived with a vibrancy that was impossible to ignore. The transformation was a testament not only to the work they had done, but to the resilience of the people who had stepped up to continue the legacy. Rory found themselves back in the garden, a place that had always brought them solace. It was late afternoon, and the golden light bathed the flowers and vegetables in a soft glow. The garden was alive with activity. Kids played tag on the paths, and a group of volunteers worked on adding a new section for medicinal plants. Rory smiled as they watched Mateo give instructions to a younger boy, his confidence growing with each passing day. "Can you believe how far he's come?" a familiar voice said behind them. Rory turned to see Jackson leaning casually against the fence, his ever-present leather jacket slung over one shoulder. "Not just him," Rory replied, gesturing to the bustling scene around them. "All of this. It's like watching a dream grow legs and start running." Jackson chuckled. "You always had a way with words." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, taking it all in. Then Jackson spoke again, his tone more serious. "Do you ever regret stepping back?" Rory shook their head. "No, it was the right thing to do. Watching them take ownership of this, it's better than anything we could have done alone." Jackson tilted his head, watching Mateo for a moment longer. "It's wild, isn't it? How much you can change a place, and yourself, if you just give it time." Rory nodded. Time, patience, and a lot of hard work. Later that day, Rory wandered into the community center, now buzzing with life. The walls were lined with photos and artwork from past events, a visual history of everything they had accomplished. Rory paused in front of one photo in particular, a group shot from the festival, everyone smiling and holding up their hands in victory. "Hard to believe it's been months," Dane said, joining Rory at the wall. He had traded his old leather vest for a simple button-up shirt, a change that reflected the person he had become. "It feels like a lifetime," Rory admitted, "but in a good way." Dane nodded, his gaze lingering on the photo. "You know, I used to think change was impossible, that people like me were stuck in whatever mess we were born into. But you proved me wrong." Rory smiled. "You proved yourself wrong, Dane. All we did was give you the space to do it." Dane laughed softly, shaking his head. "You make it sound easy, but I'll never forget what it felt like to be given a second chance. Not everyone gets that." "And you didn't waste yours," Rory said. "That's what matters." As the evening approached, the community gathered in the main hall for a special event, the unveiling of a new mural. This one had been designed and painted entirely by the younger participants in the workshops, a symbol of the next generation stepping into leadership. Rory and Jackson took seats at the back, content to let the spotlight belong to others. When the curtain dropped, the room erupted into applause. The mural was a colorful, vibrant depiction of the neighborhood's journey, a broken road transformed into a thriving garden, hands building bridges instead of walls, and at the center, a tree whose branches held countless names. The tree symbolized everyone who had contributed, past and present. Rory felt a lump in their throat as they scanned the mural. Their name was there, along with Jackson's, Dane's, Diesel's, and so many others who had poured their hearts into the project. It was a reminder that their work would always be part of the foundation, even if they were no longer at the forefront. After the unveiling, Mateo approached Rory and Jackson, his face glowing with excitement. "What did you think?" he asked. "It's incredible," Rory said. "You should be proud." "Yeah, kid," Jackson added. "You and the others knocked it out of the park." Mateo grinned. "We couldn't have done it without you." Rory shook their head. "You could have, and you did. That's what this is all about, showing people that they're capable of more than they realize." Mateo hesitated, then asked, "Do you think it'll last? I mean, without you here to guide us?" "It will," Rory said firmly, "because it doesn't depend on any one person. It depends on all of you, working together. And from what I've seen, you've got this." As the night wound down, Rory and Jackson found themselves back in the garden. The crowd had thinned, and the sounds of laughter and conversation faded into the background. "Do you ever think about what's next for us?" Jackson asked. "All the time," Rory admitted, "but I've learned something important through all of this." "What's that?" "That it's not about having all the answers. It's about showing up, being willing to learn, and trusting that the pieces will fall into place." Jackson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've got a point. I spent so much time thinking strength was about control. Turns out it's about letting go." They shared a quiet laugh, the weight of their shared journey settling into something lighter, more hopeful. As Rory left the garden that night, they paused at the gate and looked back one last time. The neighborhood was alive, a living testament to what could happen when people came together with a shared purpose. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was enough. They walked away with a deep sense of peace, knowing that the lessons they had learned and the ones they had helped teach would continue to ripple outward, touching lives they might never even know. And that, they thought, was the greatest victory of all.